Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching second part of What If Naruto Was Sent to Fairy Tale World by Madara. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Hi, I'm Happy. I'm a part of Natsu's and Lisana's family and I'm also a part of this great guild called Fairy Tale. I just had my first birthday party and now I'm just a little older than a year old. The members of the guild are really nice to me, but there's this one blonde guy that never lets me go on S-class missions with Natsu and his friends. Apparently, he's the team leader and says that it's too dangerous, even though that Natsu is stronger than him. He's so mean to me. The blue Exceed turned and glared at the blonde who was eating his vile bowl of spaghetti splattered with soup. "Why are you talking like I'm not here, Happy? And who are you talking to?" he asked. He referred to it as ramen and claimed it was the food of the gods, but Happy consistently insisted that fish was superior. Happy, who had neither nails nor claws, leapt at the blonde and started to scratch at her face. With amusing tears streaming from his eyes, Happy whimpered, "Why are you so mean to me, Naruto?" Happy swiping at his face didn't count as an annoyance because he barely felt anything, so Naruto remained silent and content to eat his bowl of ramen in a peaceful manner. After finishing his bowl of ramen, Naruto questioned, "Shouldn't you be with Natsu or Lisana? What are you doing at the guild without them?" Having grown weary, the blue Exceed was now hiding on Naruto's hair and teasingly tugging at a few of the spikes. When the four of them trained in the forest, Happy preferred to be with Lisana, who always gave him tasty fish, even though the Exceed was nearly always with Natsu. Due to their playful arguments about their favorite foods, Naruto and Happy had developed a somewhat humorous relationship during the year that the blonde had joined Fairy Tale. The rest of the guild members were alarmed by the fact that a cat-like creature could speak, but the blonde was oddly unaffected. It seemed as though nothing could ever stop the blonde. Naruto nodded and turned his chair so that his back was to the bar counter, allowing him to lean against it. Natsu went on a mission with Gray and Kana, and Lisana is with her siblings on another mission also. Naruto calmly remarked, "So why aren't you with either of them?" "That doesn't answer my question." Happy bit one of the spikes in Naruto's hair as she carried on playing with it. The blue Exceed said, "I like fish. Do you have any fish?" In a random question. When he realized he was not receiving a response, the blonde simply sighed and tapped a seal on his arm. With stars in his eyes, Happy leaned into the tiny cloud of smoke that had formed, already aware of what awaited him. Perfectly cut sushi and sashimi were on a small plate on the bar counter after the smoke had cleared. With great anticipation, Happy leapt off Naruto's head and started devouring the little meal. Happy said with joy, "Yum, I like fish," as he bit into another piece of sashimi, this time a blue tuna. Naruto turned to watch the Exceed finish the small meal, satisfied to see the feline creature keep eating. "I wonder what I should do today. I don't really want to train today. Natsu, Gray, and Kana are probably on another B-class mission. They might be A-class material, but they're still green. I wonder if I could make them S-class mages by the end of next year." Naruto was thinking to himself. Happy's satisfied sigh after completing the fish meal snapped the blonde out of his reverie. With a smile, Happy said, "I wish you gave me fish more often. I wouldn't call you mean." Then, before leaping back onto Naruto's head, "I have around 10 more seals that contain sushi just because of you, but I'll stay silent on that." Naruto asked nonchalantly as he swiveled in his chair to face the guild, "What do you want to do today, Happy?" Most of its members were fighting, drinking, or playing. The mages at the guild were going about their daily business, but some of them were out on a mission. Happy's eyes lit up after he lifted a paw to his chin. The Exceed exclaimed, "Let's go fishing," with excitement. Despite the temptation to facepalm, Naruto managed to stand up. Naruto left the guild building and headed toward Natsu's house on the Magnolia streets, saying, Fine, whatever. I need to stop by Natsu's house to pick up his fishing poles before we go to the creek." "So, Naruto, when's your birthday?" "October 10th. You ask this every time, you know that, right?" "Aye, sir." Happy straightened his back and saluted. Naruto laughed and kept walking slowly, content to enjoy the cool winter air even though spring was drawing near. The trees were starting to produce new leaves. Naruto whispered to himself, "Springtime of youth, huh?" as he recalled a particular, green beast of Konoha. Although Naruto possessed Kurama's chakra, which was essentially a chakra steroid in and of itself, he had never learned how to open any of the celestial gates. "If I ever use any kind of Kyuubi chakra mode or Biju mode, it will never last as long as working with Kurama and won't be as powerful. Kurama was gathering chakra while I was in form and we were sharing out chakra at the same time, which was a mix between multiple cage level chakra and nearly godlike chakra levels, unlike now where I have a limiter on my chakra since it's only Kurama's chakra and a little of mine. even with about double cage level. Kurama said that I would have complete access to his chakra, but it's still only a fraction of what he really had. Before he left the cage, there was only as much chakra as I could handle when I was 18. If I had a few more years, maybe I would have been able to handle most of Kurama's chakra, but not back then. But if I can gather Iterano in the air and convert it to purified chakra at an accelerated rate, maybe I'll be able to hold onto the form and increase its strength. Either way, I doubt there are people that can push me to use complete Biju mode unless there are some crazy people out there as strong as Madara or Hashirama. Those two were ridiculous. Naruto was broken out of his musings when Happy pulled on Naruto's hair slightly harder than normal. "We're here, Naruto." The blonde briefly regained his bearings after losing his distracted gaze. Naruto approached the door and opened it, realizing that he was in fact in front of Natsu's house in the forest. Naruto looked at the mess on the floor and said, "Why does he never clean up? We came to his house multiple times to help him clean and he always messes it up in a matter of days." The floor was littered with books, pillows, towels, clothing, and other everyday items. When Naruto and the group visited Natsu's home, they fixed the haphazardly arranged pictures on the wall. "I helped him," Happy declared with pride. Naruto looked up from the cluttered living room and gave the cat, like Exceed, a deadpan look. The blonde questioned incredulously, "You help him mess the house on purpose?" The Exceed answered with the utmost seriousness while maintaining a straight face. "Aye, sir," Happy replied, saluting once more. Naruto's impulses prevailed this time, and the blonde gave a face palm as he entered the house. As he stepped over books and clothing that had been misplaced, Naruto remarked, "I really hope he doesn't do this on purpose." To see where Natsu had put his fishing poles, Naruto looked first to the left and then to the right. But the Exceed remained silent when asked, "Fishing poles, where does Natsu put the fishing poles, Happy?" Happy was looking up at something when Naruto looked up at the Exceed that was perched on his hair. Naruto was intrigued when he noticed the fishing poles suspended from the ceiling. Naruto deadpanned, "Okay, how did he manage to get them up there in the first place?" "I flew up there and put it there. Natsu told me to," said Happy. Naruto sighed and closed his eyes. As wings appeared on the back of the Exceed, Happy leapt off Naruto's head and said, "Can you get them, Happy? We need to go fishing since you wanted to go." Happy then leapt to the air, snatched one of the fishing poles, and tossed it to Naruto. With ease, the blonde grabbed it and started to leave the house, picking up books and setting them on a shelf as he went. Happy exclaimed, "Yay! Fishing means food, and fish food is great," as he landed on Naruto's head. As he shut the door to Natsu and Happy's home and started to make his way through the forest to the creek, Naruto chuckled at the Exceed's simplistic logic. Happy looked thoughtful and said, "That's nice, Happy. Hey, you need to clean the house and take care of Natsu, okay?" When Happy asked, "How am I supposed to take care of Natsu if he takes care of me and is older than me?" Naruto grinned. Despite his youth in the elemental nations, Naruto was unquestionably the strongest ninja among all the shinobi forces, and he had accepted the responsibility of carrying all of their hopes. "It's a mutual thing, Happy," Naruto said in a voice that was oddly sage. "It doesn't matter how old you are, it just matters if you help and want to take care of him." This realization caused Happy's eyes to widen, and then the Exceed grinned broadly. Naruto raised his head and laughed unreservedly, saying, "Okay. If Natsu asks me to tell Urza she is fat, I'll tell her that." With a joyful feeling in his chest, the blonde thought to himself, "Oh man, the thought of someone telling Urza she's fat, especially since she constantly eats strawberry cake, yay. That will be a great day." Even if Natsu had become much stronger in the last year, he would be completely destroyed if he were ever caught by Urza. No matter how strong a person is, a woman who is angry can be dangerous. The two walked through the forest for a few more minutes before arriving at the creek. Naruto approached and took a seat at the edge of a small wooden pier, his legs hanging over the edge. Happy left his cozy perch on Naruto's head and took a seat beside the blonde. The storm of Fairy Tail grasped the fishing pole, wound it up, and then whipped the fishing line into the creek with his wrist. Happy abruptly stood up on his short legs and pointed to an arbitrary spot inside the creek. "Move the hook over there. There's a fish over there." Happy leapt onto the blonde's lap and started tugging on her arm when Naruto stayed motionless. The Exceed stepped up his efforts when Naruto's arm remained motionless, and the strain caused his eyes to close. "Pull it over." "Oh, I caught something," Naruto said abruptly. Happy looked toward the creek and ceased tugging at the blonde's arm. The blonde handed the fishing pole to Happy, who accepted it without glancing up at her. Where's the fish?" the blonde asked. The Exceed struggled against the fish's strength and started pulling as hard as he could as soon as Happy had the pole in his hands. As he continued to fight the fish, Happy started to stand diagonally and completely lean backwards. With the blonde's chin resting on his hand, Naruto encouraged her, saying, "Come on, Happy." Happy lost momentum and started to lose to the fish after a few more moments. The fish flew out of the water in a single fluid motion after Naruto calmly removed the fishing pole from Happy's grasp and pulled. The blonde drew out a kunai and infused it with wind chakra, giving it a razor-sharp edge, just before the fish touched Naruto's hands. Then, using the weapon with incredible skill, Naruto sliced the fish into several pieces and caught every slice that fell onto a plate he removed from one of his seals. Happy exclaimed, "Fish!" with joy. Happy leapt on the food as soon as Naruto set the plate on the wooden pier. Naruto set the fishing pole aside and got to his feet while the Exceed was eating. "Happy, are there any fishes that fly out of the water around here?" "MMHMM, Happy muttered, her mouth full. Naruto nodded as the Exceed said something else that sounded like, 1 mile down, and gestured somewhere farther down the creek. After finishing his final piece of sushi, the blue Exceed nodded and said, "Hey Happy, want to see something cool?" With a single fishing pole left on the wooden pier to signify that someone was there, Naruto picked up Happy and threw his Pong kunai, standing motionless for a few seconds before vanishing in an orange flash. Naruto said, "Perfect," as soon as he looked at the fish leaping out of the water in the creek. With a smile, Naruto extracted 8 kunais from his seals, one between each finger, and asked, "What are you going to show me?" The blonde suddenly erupted into action, hurling each of the bladed knives so quickly and forcefully that it appeared as though his arms were a blur. The sound is a thunk, 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 thunk. The 8 kunais landed on various tree trunks, but each one had a fish flailing around that had been punctured by a kunai. Naruto glanced down at the Exceed, who was looking surprised. With a slight smirk, Naruto remarked, "Cool, right?" After giving a slow nod, Happy flew to the kunais across the creek and tugged on them to seize the fish, but the knives were too firmly embedded in the tree trunks to be removed. Naruto said, I'm coming," as Happy turned around. The blonde simply started to cross the water to the other side of the creek after walking down the bank to the water's edge. When Naruto and Happy returned to Natsu's house a short while later with all of the fish they had collected, Naruto didn't trust Natsu with the food. Naruto remarked, "Anytime you want sushi, just ask me, okay?" Happy gave a quick nod and then soared to Naruto's head. Happy exclaimed, "Okay. Now let's go back to the guild," with joy. With closed eyes and a slight smile on his lips, Naruto nodded. The two then vanished from view. The Fairy Tail Guild Hall is the location. Makarov sobbing was the first sound Naruto heard when he opened the guild's doors. The first thing he saw was Makarov wearing a geyser, a puddle forming beneath the little elder, and Natsu, Kana, and Gray standing in front of the master with sheepish expressions on each of their faces. With bewildered eyebrows, the blonde hurried over to the bar counter. Makarov caught sight of Naruto and started talking as he was halfway to the bar counter. "Why? The first mission that you don't go with them, they cause even more destruction than before you became the team leader," Makarov shouted. The blonde's body trembled with laughter as Naruto's eyes widened and he threw his head back to the ceiling in a fit of laughter. As Naruto calmed down and continued to laugh a little, the entire guild turned to him. "It seems that no matter what, fairy tale mages will be fairy tale mages. After all, it seems that property damage is one of our specialties, right, Happy?" "Aye, sir." Naruto made a nod, and Happy mimicked the blonde's gesture. "Ah, such smart 1-year-olds. The address is Naruto's apartment." A certain blonde was sitting in his room in one of Magnolia's nicer, wealthier apartment buildings. A simple bed, a wooden desk leaning against the wall directly beneath the square window, and a closet at the other end of the room with a shelf full of books and few clothes were all part of the tidy, white, washed room. Just beneath the window, Naruto was leaning against the wall and sitting on top of his spotless desk, leafing through his younger brother's diary. He thought of Konohamaru as his little brother, even though he didn't have a younger brother. At the moment, the blonde was going through the diary of the honorable grandson. A sense of nostalgia crept into the blonde's chest as he read on. "I met this ninja named Naruto who I thought was a jerk at first, but he taught me a jutsu that beat Ebisu Sensei in a single move." Naruto, obviously recalling the day, laughed to himself. The day Naruto first met Konohamaru and taught the young child how to transform into a harem jutsu was during his early genin years, when he was naive and untrained. When he heard a knock at the front door, the blonde put his book down and placed it on a shelf beside some unremarkable novels. Naruto sighed and rose from his cozy chair, heading from his room into the living room before opening his front door. "Gray, Kana, Natsu, and Happy were in front of his apartment room in the second floor hallway. "What is it, you 3 or 4? They asked. Kana was dressed a little nicer than usual, with skinny jeans and a V-neck shirt that perfectly accentuated her body curves despite her diminutive size, while Gray and Natsu were dressed as usual. She also had a beige shoulder bag that looked like a purse. Naruto glanced at her outfit change before turning back to all 4 of them. "Makarov told us to tell you that you had to go on the mission with us because of what happened last time," Gray stated bluntly. With a sigh, Naruto opened his door wider and gestured for the 4 to enter. "Get comfortable. I'm going to cook breakfast and change. Hope you guys don't eat too much, especially you, Natsu." The Dragon Slayer merely chuckled and gave Naruto a back pat before taking Happy inside Naruto's tidy and reasonably spacious apartment. This was a first for his 3 teammates, as Naruto was the only one who had ever entered the blonde's apartment. "You keep your place surprisingly clean. There aren't any clothes on the floor from stripping randomly," Kana said, removing her sandals to enter the front door. Knowing that little, light-hearted jab was for him, Gray complained. Kana remarked, "By the way, nice view," indicating the screen door leading to a terrace with a view of the whole town. Natsu exclaimed, "Whoa, there's so many books here," as she entered Naruto's chamber. Kana turned to face Naruto, her expression a little confused. Though he wasn't facing her, Naruto noticed it quickly and asked, "What?" She said nothing, then spoke. Natsu hurried out of Naruto's room before Naruto could reply, "Nothing. It's just I didn't expect you to read books. You don't seem the type to sit down and just read. In fact, how do you read if you train so often?" "Hey, check me out!" exclaimed Natsu. Each of the other 3 mages turned in a different way. Although the Ice Mage would never say it aloud, Gray and Kana thought Natsu looked pretty good, despite Naruto's somewhat irritated glare. Since the blonde was dressed in jeans and a white shirt with a red spiral on the back and right sleeve, the Dragon Slayer was dressed in Naruto's sage attire. Kana looked at the clothes and remarked, "That doesn't look bad, Natsu, but Naruto looks better in it than you do, especially with his headband. Gives him a certain vibe." With a swift nod, Natsu turned to return to Naruto's room. "Okay. Let me get the headband then." Natsu was about to return to the blonde's room when the door abruptly shut in front of the Dragon Slayer. Naruto simply said, "No touching the forehead protector," as Natsu turned around and pouted. With a sigh, the blonde motioned for the 4 of them to sit and wait at a circular table in the living room. Naruto turned and vanished into the kitchen after saying, "I'm going to cook some breakfast, so just get comfortable. Give me about 15 minutes. Happy stood in the center of the table and asked, "Can I have fish?" Naruto said from the kitchen, "Sure, but I'm going to give it to you at the same time I give the others their breakfast," while he removed a pan from the pantry. Happy sat back on top of the table and exclaimed, "Yay, fish." From the table, Natsu said, "Naruto, do you need me to make a fire?" The 3 people at the table were just lounging in their chairs when they heard the sounds of light sizzling. Naruto replied, "No thanks, I don't need a kitchen fire." "Ah, come on. I'm not that bad, am I?" Kana and Gray's deadpan looks essentially summed up Naruto's question, but there was no answer. Natsu questioned incredulously, "Are you serious?" Gray and Kana simply nodded their heads and perspired. "Natsu is a professional at property damage," said Happy at random. Natsu turned to the kitchen after giving the Exceed a small glare. With a slightly childish tone, the Dragon Slayer said, "Naruto, I'm not that bad, am I?" The response was once more silence, though the sizzling did become a little louder. According to Gray, "I think that's a yes, hotshot," with a tick mark on his forehead. Natsu gave Gray a glare right away. Gray instantly wrinkled his face and leaned forward, asking, "What did you say, ice for brains?" Natsu accepted the challenge and leaned across the table, while Gray imitated his motion. "You want to fight, huh?" When the 2 were at odds, Natsu questioned, "Is that a challenge?" Right in the middle of them, Kana was asking herself in her mind which boy would be stronger. From the kitchen, Naruto declared, "No fighting in my place unless you want to pay for the damages." The Dragon Slayer sat back in his seat, and Natsu instantly backed down with a sheepish chuckle. Unlike Natsu, Gray could probably afford the repairs, so he grinned a little triumphantly. While Naruto was cooking, his guests continued to lightheartedly joke around and discuss a variety of unrelated topics for the next 10 minutes. Kana abruptly took a magazine out of her bag and dramatically set it on the table. "What do you want us to see from Sorcerer's Magazine?" Gray responded. With confidence, Natsu crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and gave a wise nod. "Maybe she wants to show me that I'm finally becoming popular," he exclaimed. "I doubt that," a straight-faced Happy said. Natsu's eyes snapped open, and he gave his family member a fierce look. Happy just stared straight ahead, his face apathetically. "Hey, aren't you supposed to be agreeing with me?" he asked. The Exceed abruptly said. "Urza is fat." Natsu, Gray, and Kana laughed after being shocked by the statement's absurdity and randomness. Happy's words caused Naruto, who had just finished preparing breakfast, to laugh a little. The blonde picked up 4 plates and arranged the small breakfast of pastrami sandwiches, toast, bacon, and eggs on each one. But if he ever said that around Urza, I'm pretty sure she would beat up Natsu for corrupting a child. The blonde then proceeded to the living room and carefully set the 4 plates on the table for himself and his 3 guests after managing to balance them on both hands. Itadakimasu. Natsu and Gray started eating the breakfast right away, with forks already on the table. It smelled delicious. In order to tell Naruto something, Kana held back, but Happy spoke before she could begin. The young Exceed said, "Naruto, what about me?" With a smile on his face, Naruto took the last chair and opened a little sushi plate before giving it to the Exceed. Naruto then grabbed his fork and started eating, but he stopped when he noticed Kana looking at him. "Yes?" he asked, holding the pierced piece of bacon and fork in midair. After opening her magazine and turning the pages, Kana stopped at a particular page and showed it to Naruto. The blonde's eyes widened in surprise at once. "Wow, doesn't this remind of the bingo book back at home, the past? But seriously, they would do this over who girls want as their boyfriends?" Naruto questioned, "And what did you want to tell me by showing this?" Kana crossed her arms over her tiny chest, leaned back in her chair, and set it on the table for everyone to see. "Nothing. I'm just showing you since you never read magazines or the news," Kana replied. Natsu and Gray leaned across the table. Since it was directly in front of him, Happy didn't need to take any action. When the 3 saw Naruto's brief demonic glare at them, they almost spit out the food in their mouths, barely stopping it from happening. Kana had turned to a page that showed Naruto dressed in sage, the blonde gazing off into the distance while the garments billowed slowly in the wind. The sunset in the picture's background was fading into a fleeting radiance. His name was bolded and placed next to the number 6 at the top of the page. His nickname, Arashi, Storm, appeared immediately beneath his name in bold, slightly smaller letters, followed by the words, "Youngest S-class mage in the history of Earthland." Random statistics and quotes from authors and other mages were displayed on the side of the page, along with a brief description of each of Naruto's magical abilities. Before taking a bite out of his breakfast, Naruto responded, "That's not true, Kana. I believe that information is one of the most important things that a person must have, but I didn't think this would be helpful until you showed me this today. But how did they get this picture of me in the first place?" The voice of Kana was a little sage. "The media is everywhere, Naruto," she said. When Gray, Happy, and Natsu saw the paper, they were shocked and said, "You're 6th in who girls want their boyfriends to be." Naruto chewed on a piece of bacon while closing his eyes and sighing. With a seductive smirk that seemed to fit her somehow, Kana leaned forward in her seat and said, "Fangirls, the bane of my existence. What's even worse is that I'm 13, closing on 14 in a few months. What if I told you that I was one of those fangirls that voted for you?" Kana replied. After a brief moment of hesitation, Naruto put his fork down on the table. Calmly, Naruto remarked, "I'm flattered that you think that way, Kana." The story inside his head was entirely different. He was uncertain as to whether Kana was acting in certain ways for a specific reason. Sometimes Kana was a blank page and much harder to read than Hinata, but perhaps that was because he occasionally had trouble reading faces. When Kana stated, "Nah, I just voted since I saw your name," she made her motivation clear. "Wait, you're not even denying it or caring that you're 6th on the list of mages?" replied Gray. Naruto gave a headshake. "I don't really care what they do. However, I find it interesting that mages already know who I am enough to make statements about me, and I'm wondering how these reporters even got information on my skills and abilities," calmly replied Naruto. "They ask mages, but a majority of their information comes from files," Gray stated. "But how do you find it beneficial to read this at all?" Gray inquired. Naruto stated, "Information, as though it were the most straightforward thing in the world." He knew what to expect if he knew anything about other mages. The blonde preferred to have as much information as possible, something Arrow Sennin had ingrained in her mind, even though it was unlikely that there would be a war or even events like the Chunin exams between multiple guilds. "Either way, I'm most likely going to disappear from that magazine eventually." The 4 other people at the table, for some reason, did not believe that statement and actually believed that the blonde would advance in status. Oh, how accurate they were. "The Fairy Tail Guild Hall is the location." "No," said Naruto. "Why not?" whimpered Natsu. Naruto kept his gaze fixed on the first, floor mission board, carefully examining the list of missions. "I don't want to take an S-class mission for at least a week," said Naruto. Natsu tried to persuade the blonde, saying, "But we can do it." Naruto looked away from the board and fixed his gaze on the eager Dragonslayer. "Natsu, understand this. All of the S-class missions we've gone on, even if they are more difficult than the A-class missions, were the easiest and simplest of all the choices on the request board on the second floor." Natsu widened his eyes, but Naruto wasn't, "And until you become stronger, more analytical, and more tactical, I'm not going to take you on the more difficult S-class missions. This applies to all of you," Naruto told Gray and Kana. As Happy joined the group with the Strauss family, he inquired, "When can I join on any S-class mission then?" Naruto turned the Exceed over and grinned at the three of them as well as at himself, but when he noticed Mira staring at him, his smile turned into a smirk. As the blonde kept glaring, the oldest member of the Strauss family simply growled at her. "When Natsu becomes strong enough to protect you on missions without hindering his performance. Good morning to you, Mira." Abruptly, Mira said, "Take us." Still staring at Mira, Naruto tilted his head sideways in bewilderment. The S-class trials would be up in a few months, and Mira wanted to get an early start on the missions, but she didn't dare ask the blonde anything. "I'm sorry. Take you guys where?" Mira asked, taking a deep breath to gather herself. She said, "Take us on an S-class mission, at last." "No," Naruto replied right away. Mira glared at the blonde with unbridled rage, as if surprised by the instant rebuttal. She demanded, "And why the hell not?" Lysana gave her sister a sideways shove. "Language, Mira. Nay. Don't corrupt Happy," said the younger sister. Mira was annoyed and clicked her tongue, but she would do it for her sister. "Fine, I'll watch my language. But," she said, once again glaring at Naruto, who was apathetically staring back at her with a mission request in his right hand, "you still haven't told me why not." The blonde considered how best to convey his logic to her, however, he felt that being candid and blunt would be the best. "Okay, I'll be completely honest with you, but before that, let me ask you something. Can you beat me?" Mira immediately became silent as she struggled to answer. Her pride wanted her to say yes, but the obvious answer was no at last. She conceded to the obvious reality. "No, I can't beat you," she said quietly, her glare becoming less intense. Naruto gave a nod. The fact that she had somewhat shed her pride was encouraging. "Correct. Now, if on an S-class mission, you had to go up against someone like me, what would you do?" Was a simple question for Mira, who raised her head and answered right away. She said, "I would use Seiden's Soul," but she didn't anticipate Naruto saying it at the same moment. "I would use Seiden's Soul." "Mira, don't be surprised, it was a predictable answer. Again, that would be your best course of action currently. However, I happen to know what happens when you delve completely into Seiden's Soul. Your demon inside will take over for a period of time and you will be a loose cannon, attack and friend and foe alike. And there are a few things I dislike having on missions. Lacking information on a mission, unpredictability, and loose cannons," Naruto said bluntly. All of the blonde's statements were accurate. Seiden's Soul might temporarily give Mira enormous strength, but there were disadvantages. If you go too far, you'll experience what Naruto described. "What do you know about takeover magic and controlling an inner demon, huh?" Mira asked angrily. Naruto's eyes hardened for a moment. "More than you would ever know." The blonde, however, made no mention of his prior position as Jinchuriki. "It doesn't matter how much I know about it, I'm just stating a fact. Every time you have used even a small amount of Seiden's Soul, your personality shifted and you become more animalistic and feral. And I'm certain that if you tap too far into the power well, you would go into something akin to a berserker's rage." This time, Mira chose to remain quiet. "Then again, I said currently for a reason. You're asking because you want an impressive mission record to qualify for the S-class trials, right?" Mira gave a soft nod. The information caused Mira, her two siblings, and Naruto's teammates to widen their eyes. "Okay, let me tell you a little secret. The mission record has almost nothing to do with who Master and the S-class mages choose for the candidates. Rather, it's the mage himself, or herself that makes the difference." With a tone of surprise, she questioned, "Then why would we always go on a kind of mission rush when the S-class trials come closer?" Naruto made an ignorant gesture with his palms up. "The best thing you could do is just train and become a better mage. I apologize if I offended you. Who knows? Maybe someone started doing that and everyone started following him or her. After a while, it became a yearly occurrence," Naruto said as he made his way to the bar counter to have Master stamp and approve the mission request. "We would like to take this A-class mission," Naruto stated, setting the mission request on the table. "Naruto and his team are reporting for mission." Makarov waved his hand without setting down his beer cup. Makarov reached for the mission without looking and stamped it quickly, asking, "Why are you always so formal whenever you report and informal every other time?" Naruto had a perfect record thus far, so he wasn't particularly concerned. When Naruto's mission was stamped, he instantly smiled and became happier. Naruto turned around and said, winking, "Who knows, GG.san." From behind Naruto, Mira exclaimed, "Wait, can we join on that mission then? You said it was A class, right?" With his back to the girl, the blonde's smile was concealed as he came to a halt. Naruto then turned around and grinned at the elderly man, saying, "GG.san, include the Strauss siblings in the mission. See you later, GG.san." Switch in time. 3 hours. The two teams were returning to Magnolia by train after successfully completing their A-class mission. Nevertheless, the teams purchased 2 rooms due to seating concerns. Naruto felt that Mira had wanted to say something during the mission but refrained because of the presence of everyone else, so he chose to accompany her. Thus, Happy, his team, and her 2 siblings all got into a single vehicle. Naruto saw that Kana gave Mira a seemingly envious look before getting into her car, but for some odd reason, no one voiced any complaints. Somewhere, way in the back of Naruto's mind, he kept that knowledge. Naruto probably paid for a somewhat opulent car for the larger group, so at least no one voiced any complaints about the setup. Until the train actually began to move, Natsu was cheering. Both Naruto and Mira took a seat in the train's plain car and remained silent, allowing the lazy afternoon to take over for a while. Mira's hostility toward Naruto appeared to largely go away after he had just 3 hours prior given her an explanation for why he would not allow her to accompany him on S-class missions. Naruto spoke 5 minutes after the train had left for Magnolia. He asked languidly, "So what did you want to talk about?" Mira gave him a long look and then dropped it right away. "I was going to ask why you take Gray, Natsu, and Kana on S-class missions but you wouldn't take us. I mean, I'm stronger than any of those 3, right?" Naruto said nonchalantly as he considered the situation. But Mira dropped her head, taking his silence as a bad thing. Naruto finally said something. How should I say this? Yes, you're definitely stronger than them, but they have better teamwork and more experience in fighting with me than you would if you were in my team. I'm positive that if it was a year ago, you would have beaten the 3 of them without even trying by yourself, but now, it's a high possibility you would lose. Naruto's statement that she was undoubtedly stronger made Mira jump once more. When Naruto saw this, he tried to comfort her right away. "This doesn't mean that you aren't a strong mage by any means, you're around high A class for certain and you are strong for your age." The words, "but not nearly as strong as you," were spoken in silence by Mira. Pretending not to hear her quiet comment, Naruto went on. "And you will be nominated for the S-class trials this year," Naruto replied. Mira instantly brightened up once more, her face showing a hint of surprise. Naruto shook his head and said, "Wait, how do you know that? Did Master tell you?" "I simply know. It's like I know that Urza will be chosen this year as well as the other 3 that contested last year. I keep tabs on all of my fellow guild members and know who GG.san would choose by deduction and reasoning. It helps that I was also a candidate for Hokage and that Chan taught me the basics of choosing teams for missions," Naruto was thinking. Mira growled, "Urza is going to be in the trials? Oh, I'm going to kick her ass." Naruto laughed. The white-haired mage instantly lost her wild appearance and appeared a little sheepish, something she would never have done in front of the blonde before. What's so funny?" Mira cursed herself to herself for the little stutter. With a hint of nostalgia, Naruto reminisced about his childhood rivalry with Sasuke and his old team. "Nothing. It's just that your rivalry reminds me of something," he said. Mira abruptly said, "I have a request. Can I train with your group?" Naruto answered without hesitation. Naruto said, his face darkened by the afternoon light, "Sure, go ahead. I'm just warning you now though, that my training is hell." Mira swallowed for a second, but she remained resolute. His training couldn't be that bad, could it? She had a demon in her body. 1 week is the time skip. Naruto did not find it funny. His team and Mira were gathered around him on the table, laughing at him as he stared at a page in the Sorcerer's magazine. Mira was shocked to learn that Naruto actually had a purpose for everything he did. Mira had made the decision to try to get to know him over the course of the week. Even though that was a contributing factor, he intended for her and Urza to learn strategies and deceit by playing practical jokes on them. Though he wasn't sure how Mira's Satan soul abilities actually functioned, Naruto taught her some fighting techniques, strategies, and even tricks. By the end of the week, Her dislike of the blonde had all but vanished, replaced by respect and a modicum of admiration for the blonde's diligence in bettering himself and his attention to each of his fellow guild members. He looked at the photo of himself in the magazine and asked, "When the hell did they take this picture of me?" It was an image of him contentedly consuming ramen from a stand this time. Once more, his name and moniker were bolded, along with a few quotes from authors and magicians, as well as his skills and statistics from the populace. But his phone number was different. Kana reiterated, "The media is everywhere. Hey Naruto, you're number 4 now," Natsu exclaimed, clutching his stomach while giggling. With a slight complaint, Naruto put the magazine down. Naruto sarcastically questioned, "Seriously, are the girls here a bunch of cradle robbers?" The laughter of the 4 teenagers surrounding Naruto and the Exceed intensified. Looking for something new, the blonde quickly perused the pages. He sighed as he closed the magazine after flipping through it all. "Hey Mira, is there a reason why your brother and sister don't join us for training?" Mira wiped away a stray tear from her laughter and briefly averted her gaze. "The group of teenagers laughed lightly when I told them what you did for training and they chose not to join, even though Elfman still claims to be a man. But I have to agree with him when he said that your training regimen was ridiculous." Natsu laughed. "Oh, it only gets worse from here, Mira. I've been using gravity seals with my training sets every day since day 1, and he makes it heavier whenever I get used to the weight. Just recently, he's been adding in resistance seals, something that he never used on you or Urza," Natsu responded. The color of Mira's hair changed to match the pallor of her white face. She asked, "You're joking, right?" While Naruto and Natsu continued to smile, Kana, Gray, and Happy shook their heads. Naruto abruptly got to his feet. The blonde said as he left, "I'm going on an S-class mission alone, alright? I'll see you guys in a few days." Mira turned to face the 4 people who didn't question or even follow the blonde. They all nodded when they asked, "You guys are fine with him going by himself on an S-class mission?" Happy didn't count because he never actually participated in any missions that were higher than A-ranked. If he's by himself, he can go all out and actually do the higher ranked S-ranked missions. He may seem strong now, but what he showed during the S-class trials last year is actually on a completely different level than what he shows us, Gray stated. This piqued the interest of the other members of the group, who had witnessed the blonde's use of storm style magic, but had never witnessed him go all out. When Gray remained silent, Mira questioned, "So, are you going to tell us something about him or are you going to stay silent?" "Stay silent," he instructed. The group gave him a face. Fail, then pointed accusing fingers at him. "Then why the hell would you tell us that in the first place?" Gray laughed. Because I felt like it. But I'll tell you one thing. He made Gildart's move. The time jump is 4 months. When Naruto predicted that Mira, Urza, Freed, Bixlo, and Evergreen would be the contenders, he was right. His teammates were a little disappointed that they weren't selected after 4 months of training. But after Mira easily defeated all 3 of them in a 1-on-1 match, they relaxed and started working out even more to get better. Naruto was not amused to see that the media had somehow captured another image of him, this time of him fighting, after he had returned from the lone S-class mission. Naruto developed a variety of colorful insults for the fangirls over the course of the months, coming up with ever more ludicrous names like Cradle, Robbers, Baby Boomers, Pedo, Rapists, and a long list of others. In order to prevent the photo from ever showing him by himself, he never again went on solo missions after that one and always had a companion by his side. Naruto was unaware that not only Kana was voting for him, but also Mira, Lisanna, Natsu, Gray, Happy, and even Urza. This gave them the opportunity to play a practical joke on him, even if the blonde was unaware of it. It was still very early in the morning, so Naruto was sitting by himself at a table in the guild hall. However, his friends had grown accustomed to his early hours and began to join him. "I wonder what's going to happen for this year's S-class trials. Master told me it was at a different location, but he still hasn't told us about how the trials would actually work out this year." Naruto grunted as he pushed himself off the table to stand up and went to the pile to retrieve one magazine from the stack of the Weekly Sorcerer's Weekly that had been placed in front of the guild. The blonde's eyebrows instantly furrowed at the sight. Then Naruto picked up just one of the magazines and flipped through the pages on his way back to his table. Naruto muttered, "Cradle Robbers," upon realizing that he was still listed among the top 10 mages you want to have as a boyfriend. When the blonde mage turned to see who had called him, he saw the master gesturing for him to approach the bar counter. "Naruto Chan." Makarov filled a cup of beer and brought it closer to Naruto after he had approached the counter. What do you want me to do with this? You know I can't drink, right? Makarov casually waved his hand back and forth. Naruto simply gazed at the beer cup before turning to face the master, who was happily sipping his alcoholic beverage. It's okay, Naruto. Chan. You're 15 anyways, right? Naruto asked. I'm 14. GG.san. Also, when did I become Naruto? Chan? I don't really think I'm feminine or cute at all. Naruto replied. Makarov opened one eye and reached behind him to retrieve a sorcerer's magazine. The blonde drew back for a moment, then sighed and closed his eyes. He then took a seat on a chair facing the master, leaning his elbow against the wooden counter and resting his chin languidly on the palm of his hand. So what do you need, GG.san? I just needed to tell you that you won't be needed for the S-class trials this year, he replied. Despite raising his eyebrows, Naruto said nothing. Since there are 5 S-class candidates, I decided that 3 S-class mages would be enough. I, Gildarts, and Laxus will be filling the spots. You can do what you want that day. Naruto questioned, I don't get it. Why would you not let me help out in the trials if I'm also an S-class mage? Before he spoke, Makarov gave Naruto a direct look. Do you want to participate, Naruto? The blonde asked, looking a little surprised before giving the elderly man an eye. Smile and a sheepish smile. Not really, was the blonde's direct response. The elderly man continued to sip from his cup of alcohol while deadpanning. As his eyes seemed to gleam with a great deal of pride, Naruto grinned and said, There, my point has been proven. Anyways, how's your team doing with the training? Naruto boldly declared, Natsu will be ready next year for the S-class trials. So will Gray if he starts to focus on his physical aspects. Kana can hold her own, but I need her to excel at both the long and short range abilities she has, but she's the best. Rounded of the 3, seemingly challenging the master to dispute anything the blonde had just said. Makarov laughed a little and grinned. Naruto got out of the chair, gave a fictitious salute, turned around, and left, saying, all right, you can go now. The blonde said, see you, GG.san, and waved his hand over his shoulder. After leaving the guild, Naruto strolled leisurely through Magnolia Town's streets, ignoring the looks he was getting from the locals, including those of lust or desire from the women and annoyance or jealousy from the men. However, Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly, and the blonde did appear to radiate a bit of annoyance. In any case, the town's residents failed to notice and kept giving the wandering blonde a familiar glance. His name had become well known throughout Fury, and his wise attire was a clear indication of who the blonde was. The blonde heard the familiar sounds of training after about 5 minutes of walking out of town and into a seemingly random forest clearing. Naruto took his hands out of his pockets and leaned forward a little, narrowly avoiding Natsu's flaming fist. Natsu quickly spun around to kick at Naruto's head while the Dragon Slayer was still in midair. The sweeping kick flew directly over Naruto's head as he ducked beneath the horizontal kick, causing a slight wind that caused his hair spikes to move. Naruto swiftly straightened up and slapped a seal onto Natsu's back before he could spin again in midair and recover. The effects of an even heavier gravity seal caused the Dragon Slayer to drop to the ground, and he let out a startled wah. The impact caused a tiny cloud of dust to rise. Ignoring the Dragon Slayer's protests, Naruto walked straight past the fallen Natsu. Since Natsu was already growing accustomed to the level 9 gravity seal, Naruto applied an even stronger one to make up for it. Natsu will definitely be a powerhouse in the future. He's focusing mainly on power and speed. Maybe in about 2 or 3 years, I can help him focus on his control, but for now, I'll help him with his physical capabilities. Besides, that'll be more than enough to give him a chance at the S-class trials. Can't hit what you can't see, and his hits are also getting stronger. Damn you, Naruto, exclaimed Natsu, standing a few meters away from the blonde. The adolescent disregarded the request for assistance and carried on walking through the forest's foliage for a few more minutes until he reached the custom training clearing. Gray was meditating idly, as usual, concentrating on mastering his ice magic. Kana and Mira were working out together. Naruto had just started using gravity seals on them, though the latter was already level 8 because Mira had already become accustomed to a particular weight from all the times he had used a seal on her to prevent her from attacking him. Mira had a resistance seal applied to her, but it was weaker than Natsu's. Naruto believed that, in contrast to the Natsu, she should prioritize control over strength and speed because her transformation into the Seidan soul would provide her with the physical prowess. All 4 of the other people in the area greeted the blonde as soon as Naruto entered the clearing. After opening his eyes and giving Naruto a curt nod, Gray resumed his meditation, which the blonde had taught him and was preparing to teach Natsu. That pink-haired moron really needs to learn self-control. Both Kana and Mira waved and smiled at Naruto. But Kana's greeting was considerably more pleasant and joyful because Mira was still, well, Mira. Naruto grinned in response to each of their greetings and bided his time until the fourth. It arrived just a short while later. The blonde had already called forth a little plate of sushi and sashimi before the Exceed could complete the daily question he asked Naruto every morning. "Hey, Naruto. Do you have fish?" Happy's eyes sparkled before he leapt to his feet and used his paws to grasp the plate, clinging to its edges. After that, Happy flew alongside Gray, landed next to a cozy spot on the ground in the shade, and happily started eating his breakfast for the day. For some reason, Happy's eating habits always made Naruto laugh. The Exceed acted like a shark and thrashed his head back and forth while chewing on the fish. Naruto approached Mira, who had resumed their exercises, after he had calmed down. The oldest Strauss gave Naruto a quick glance but continued with her sets. When Mira had completed her push-ups, she finally said, "Do you need something, Naruto?" The blonde had kept quiet while she was working out, thinking to himself in private. When Naruto heard Mira's question, he nodded, recalling it from his inner thoughts. "Yay. I wanted to tell you that until the S-class trials, I'm going to be working with you individually. We're going to be working together continuously, and I'm going to take you on a few S-class missions with me for experience. Got it?" Mira grinned as she set down her water bottle and turned to face Naruto's grave expression. Mira's demanding tone made Naruto snicker. "You're finally taking me on a mission?" Mira stepped into the blonde's comfort zone and leaned closer until she was just inches from him. "Are you prepared to?" she asked. Kana noticed this and gave Mira a stern look, but she persisted in her workouts despite her silence and heavy perspiration because she wanted to defeat Mira as quickly as possible, whether it was in combat or by claiming Naruto as her own. "Wait, what? Where did that?" The brunette paused her workout to down some water and then got to her feet, drawing Naruto's and Mira's attention with the noise and movement. Both of them turned to Kana. She told Naruto, "I'm going to run," disregarding Mira's slight grin. The group leader smiled and nodded at her before turning back to Mira to discuss scheduling and on-1 training with the Strauss. Indeed, Naruto had always given each member of his team his full attention. He never offered more than a suggestion or a tip before going back to his training routines. But despite not reaping the physical rewards of his training, the blonde had never halted his training to train someone alone. Kana turned from the clearing and started jogging, moving through the forest path at a rather brisk pace. The brunette unconsciously concentrated pure magic manipulation on her legs and feet to accelerate her running, but she was still unable to understand how Naruto employed this technique, despite her constant practice. Her control had consequently improved noticeably, though it was still far below that of Gray and particularly Naruto. The ability to combine magical abilities was a very challenging feat to master. What bothered her, though, was that Naruto, who was even more addicted to training than Natsu, was actually ceasing his physical activities in order to assist Mira on an individual basis. Although Naruto would undoubtedly attempt to assist each of his teammates on an individual basis when the time came, at the moment, this was causing her constant annoyance. Mira gave the brunette a small, triumphant smirk before turning away, but it didn't make the situation any less annoying. With a sigh, Kana pulled up beside a tree and leaned against it, then drank a bottle of water that had been taken from her requip space. Naruto had instructed her to learn the fundamentals of requip so that the cards and weapons would be in a different dimension and could be instantly extracted with a magic tap, rather than being pulled out from handy locations. As a result of this development, Kana learned how to use basic requip magic by imitating Naruto's use of seals. The blonde demonstrated a basic move by transitioning from a close range to a long range attack. Naruto was fighting a clone of himself when he showed her, then he backflipped to get a better position. The battle was essentially over when the blonde, while in midair, retrieved 2 explosive tags from his seals and hurled them at the clone. Keeping this example in mind, Kana practiced using her requip to replicate Naruto's straightforward yet potent attack. It had taken her almost a month to even replicate the speed at which he removed the explosive tags. It was obviously a different matter entirely to make the action fluid and somehow combat useful. Naruto had told Kana that if she couldn't use a technique or fighting style in combat, it wouldn't matter if she knew the motions. A few of Naruto's clones all began attacking the blonde at once when Kana, the older of the two, asked what he meant and gave an example. By few, he meant almost 100 of them. The next event was a complete slaughter as Naruto exclusively employed the Hyuga fighting style, more especially, Hinata's style, along with his seals. The Dragon Slayer was as shell-shocked as Kana, Mira, and Gray, but naturally, Natsu had wanted to join the battle and had set his hands on fire in anticipation. The way Naruto was caring for the clones was captivating, even though the clones should have been as skilled as the original. It even seemed as though the original blonde wasn't trying. Naruto defeated all of the attackers before they realized it, though it was much harder to defeat the final 10 clones. He turned to the 4 after the blonde was done, grinned, and made one honest statement. After remembering that, Kana sighed and threw her water bottle back into her dimension, starting to run again. Number doesn't always mean victory. Back at the training clearing, Naruto and Mira were seated in the lotus position in front of one another, both of them with their eyes closed. When Mira noticed that Naruto was still sitting there, peacefully meditating, she opened one eye and took a deep breath. The blonde said, "Close your eyes and meditate, Mira," without even opening his eyes. After spending the last 4 months with the blonde, Mira had grown accustomed to this and didn't even react. He always knew when she had stopped meditating, but she never understood how. Mira opened her eyes wide and said, "I still don't get how meditating is beneficial to me at all, Naruto." In order to decrease the time it took to enter Sage Mode, Naruto would have preferred to finish his meditation or at the very least enter it. He sighed in mild annoyance. "As I've told you on multiple occasions, meditation will help you on your patience and your control. If you improve your control, it will be much easier to tap further into your power well without losing control," Naruto said with a calming voice. When she had stretched out and straightened her back, Mira yawned and did the same, straightening her arms above her head. "But still, making me fight and spar without even using my magic won't improve my control over my Satan soul," replied the older Strauss. After giving his clothes a quick pat, Naruto turned to face the sky, watching the clouds drift by. He gazed up at the blue sky above with his azure eyes. "But did you notice that you've mellowed out a lot and haven't been blowing a fuse at every turn? You've gotten soft," Naruto said, lowering his head to face Mira once more. The blonde gave the girl a slight smile. Mira responded with a growl and leapt back to put some distance between them. In preparation for one of their brief spars, the two dropped into their well-known stances as one. When Naruto finished establishing the rules, Mira leapt straight up, exploding from her position, leaving a small crater where she had just stood. "Same rules as always. As long as you don't use Satan Soul, I won't start using my seals. I won't use my storm magic, but that doesn't mean I'll go easy on you." She was standing right in front of Naruto a moment later, her fist already in front of his face. The blonde vanished in an instant before Mira's fist made contact with Naruto's nose. Before landing on the ground and sliding against the dirt, the white-haired girl flipped in midair, righted herself, and came to a complete stop. When Mira turned to face Naruto, who was standing on a tree branch a few meters above the ground, the blonde holding a particular tri-palmed kunai that everyone in Fairy Tail was familiar with, she said angrily, "I really hate that technique. You know that?" With a small laugh, the blonde twirled the kunai around his index finger. Naruto retorted, "Then you'll be annoyed with Laxus." Mira scowled up at the blonde, her brows knitted. The blonde abruptly vanished in a blur and then reappeared directly in front of Mira, his hand flicking in front of her forehead. Speed, possibly one of the most important attributes to a close-range fighter. Mira instantly ducked, narrowly avoiding Naruto's seemingly ineffective forehead flick, which, due to its force, produced a gust of wind. Mira snarled, "I really hate how you can manipulate your magic," as she fell to the ground, spinning on the balls of her left foot and kicking the blonde in midair with her right leg. Seeing the kick coming his way with ease, Naruto leaned back and gave the leg a slight push as it went over his head, causing her to lose her balance. But in response, Mira leaned with a slight push, dropped to both hands, raised both legs, and started to spin, her legs moving like a helicopter. Although Naruto could have easily blocked Mira's kicks with his base stats, that wasn't the purpose of the spar, so he raised his hands in front of him instead. The idea was to teach the girl how to battle a skilled close-range fighter who was incredibly skilled with magic. Mira's legs abruptly slowed down, but not by enough to allow Naruto to fall to the ground, sending the sweeping kick straight over his hair. But because the kick had slowed down, Mira had remained in that position long enough for her dress to drop, allowing the blonde to witness a particular scene. Naruto said apathetically, "Wow, Mira. I didn't know you liked to wear such revealing panties." After blushing, the girl instantly dropped her legs to the floor and punched the blonde hard. Using her own momentum against herself, the blonde grabbed the overextended limb and threw the girl over his shoulder. Mira easily righted herself in midair and landed on top of a tree branch after flying over him. The two were in opposing positions after just a few seconds. Mira gestured accusingly at the blonde on the floor. "What the hell are you saying?" exclaimed Mira, her face flushed with shame and rage. Naruto looked up at her and laughed. "Deception. Don't let my words bother you in a fight. Mira looked at the blonde for a moment before her eyes grew wide as she realized he hadn't seen anything. The girl then raised her fists in outrage against the blonde, her eyes narrowing. That's not something you joke about. Naruto responded with another laugh, this time a little louder. Mira was already on the ground and running toward him when the blonde stopped, her body at a horizontal angle and very close to the ground. Naruto said, "Strength. Prepare yourself," in a low voice that was just loud enough for the Strauss to hear. With a brilliant sheen illuminating the closed fist, Naruto lifted his right arm above his head. Mira's eyes widened in surprise. Her charge was immediately halted, and she jumped to the side just in time to see the blonde punch the ground with his fist. The blonde was at the center of the destructive attack, which resulted in a massive explosion. Earth fragments shot up from the ground with terrifying speed, causing Mira to leap into the air and avoid the approaching earth projectiles by flipping and twisting to avoid danger. A few meters away, Naruto suddenly came into view. He was standing atop a layer of earth, using his chakra to adhere to the rock and dirt as he spun calmly in midair and fixed his opponent with his intense gaze. As the two started to descend, Mira clung to a big chunk of rock and stooped to maintain her balance on top of it in midair. The two leapt from their respective surfaces as one and engaged in combat in midair. Even though Mira had improved significantly in the last 4 months, Naruto was still clearly superior in every circumstance. Naruto patiently deflected Mira's hurried blow, causing the incoming fist to barely miss his cheek. Naruto would simply flip or twist out of range whenever Mira kicked. Naruto had essentially only dodged and barely redirected attacks by the time the two touched down. After falling to her knees, Mira hurried to her feet and spun around to give Naruto a high spinning kick. This strategy had a serious flaw, so the blonde decided to end the spar. Naruto just leaned back a little just as Mira's kick was about to hit his jaw. Naruto leaned forward and waited until Mira finished her kick, just straightening herself and regaining her balance, after the kick had barely missed the barest of margins. Naruto pushed against her upper chest just before she jumped away and stood up straight, causing the girl to lose her balance and fall to the ground in shock. The spar was essentially over at this point. After a brief period of silence, Naruto sighed and Mira growled simultaneously. "You're still too aggressive, even after 4 months," the blonde said, closing his eyes and massaging his temples with his right hand. Mira countered, "There's nothing wrong with being aggressive." With a deadpan expression, Naruto let go of his hand. Mira's expression abruptly shifted from one of outrage to mild sheepishness as she looked away from Naruto. "Right, so when did you ever get a hit on me when you charged at me head on?" she asked. The scenery and trees suddenly caught her attention. "Right, just stay silent on that one. From what I got, your speed and power have both improved decently in the past 4 months, and your control is much better. However, you are still easily angered by almost any kind of barb or deceptive trick, and you still charge straight at me, something you definitely shouldn't do at the S-class trials unless you use Satan Soul." Mira glanced at the blonde from her present standing position. "It's obvious I'm going to use it, so why even bother trying to change my tactics?" Naruto immediately refuted Mira's claim, saying, "What would you do if you were against Gildarts?" The thought of facing a monster like Gildarts made Mira stop cold, and she took a sharp breath. But then she recalled Gray's statement that Naruto had managed to move Fairy Tail's ace and even attempt to defeat the blonde. Considering that she had made Naruto sweat a few times during their sparring sessions, she was pretty sure she could make S-class. She answered matter of factly, "I would charge in either way. I don't have any actual way of winning, so I'm going to go all out from the start." Before turning away from the girl and moving in an unpredictable direction, Naruto resisted the urge to facepalm and instead adopted an expression of indifference. The action confused Mira, who remained on the ground. "Wait, where are you going?" The blonde said, "I'm going to take a mission, and you're coming with me," pausing and cocking his head slightly to speak over his shoulder. Mira's eyes widened, and then, in a totally uncharacteristic moment, they gleamed at the idea of embarking on an S-class mission. She then stood up, and before Naruto could move another step, the girl was walking next to him, practically drooling at the prospect of all the incredible things she could accomplish on the missions. "I'm so going to beat Urza with this," Mira thought to herself. Conversely, Naruto was conversing with himself. "She's too straightforward and lacks tact to a certain extent, but she can notice and sometimes completely dodge my strategic attacks now. Her strength and speed has improved, but she still has a way to go if she wants to reach high Jonin to low Cage speed. She's around high Chunin to low Jonin speed right now. With her Satan Soul, her power and speed will increase dramatically, but I don't really know how long she can hold onto the transformation ever since her control increased, and neither does she since I've told her to not use it so that she could rely on her base stats more. In a week, I wonder if. When Mira interrupted his thoughts query as they entered the city Magnolia. The blonde looked at the girl and arched his brows, saying, "Hey, Naruto?" Then, once more acting strangely, Mira started to exhibit signs of anxiety. A flick of a finger here, a tilt of the head there, she started walking more quickly, her soft taps echoing softly against the stone floor. Quietly, she questioned, "Do you think I can make S-Class?" Normally, Mira would just blow through everything, well, almost everything, except for his advice, and say that she could do it, so Naruto was a little taken aback that she was asking him about this. Naruto looked straight at her and noticed that she appeared anxious about his answer. The blonde asked himself, "Does she take my opinions that highly?" before turning back to face the front. Mira verbally interrupted Naruto before he could say anything more. "Honestly, you're already S-Class to me. However, your biggest problem is that charge first, think after. Also, you ignore tactics and think that your physical strength and speed will take care of everything. That's not completely true. I got a hit on you a few times before when I used tactics or a small amount of deception. If you're going to compete in physical strength and explosive, you better have a ton to back it up or else you'll just get destroyed against Gildarts and any other powerful mages." Mira didn't respond to Naruto's forthright. The blonde was generally always honest, but when appropriate praise was due, the blonde gave it. This was something she both liked and detested about him. Nonetheless, he was very supportive and always worked practically with his team. He would demonstrate specific tactics using his clones rather than merely explaining them. Mira made the decision to say one final thing just before the two opened the doors to their guild. Naruto pressed his palm against the large door and pushed gently, allowing the door to slowly crack open. "It's strange how someone younger than me could be so much stronger and make me actually listen to him. If this had been a year ago, no, even half a year ago, I probably wouldn't have listened." Naruto turned to the girl before it fully opened and smiled at her, but it was a different kind of smile that startled Mira a little. It seemed as though he was much older than the 14-year-old he was, having seen a great deal. He was aware of the world's ways. It was not all black and white, but rather had many gray and blank blots and spots. He turned, opened the door, and entered before she could get a good look at the blonde's face. The youngest S-Class mage said, "Come on, let's go," choosing to express his feelings with his face rather than verbally answering Mira's query. Mira followed in silence, seeing the blonde's interactions with the guild members in a different way. Had he always been so comfortable and grown up? Was he always so cool under pressure? Like everyone else, he interacted with the guild members as though they were equals, but there was something about the blonde's speech and body language that made it seem as though he was defending them despite their advanced age. Mira came to the realization that Naruto was her nakama and that she was as much his as the other members of the guild. Although she had previously harbored an immature resentment toward the blonde, she had also fully accepted him. Instead of asking to accompany the blonde as he ascended the stairs, Mira pondered her thoughts in silence on the first floor. Laxus exclaimed, "Hey, shrimp," as Naruto took the last step to the second floor. When Naruto was short, the guild master's grandson gave him the nickname. Shortly after, the blonde was given the title of S-Class Mage in Storm. Laxus chose to continue calling Naruto shrimp, even though the blonde was now about 5 feet 6 after realizing that the younger blonde was annoyed by the nickname and that discussing his height with the blonde was inappropriate. Naruto maintained a neutral demeanor, having already grown accustomed to the subtle taunting that goes along with the name. Despite his general lack of interest in the other members of the guild, Laxus always recognized and respected strength. In addition to becoming the youngest S-Class mage, Naruto soon earned the nickname Storm, so it was obvious that the young blonde had a lot of strength. Thus, Naruto maintained a good rapport with the lightning mage, who was typically stoic and was happy to do so. Naruto said, "Hey, Laxus. Aren't you going to take a mission?" Primarily to start a conversation rather than out of genuine interest. Laxus moved his headphones slightly as he shifted his neck, then stretched out of the couch languidly. Naruto muttered to himself, "Not today, shrimp. How about you, finally taking another S-Class mission without those other weaklings in your team?" But he didn't seem to mind the slight directed at his team. The blonde approached the mission request board and gazed at each one in silence. "You know they aren't weak. I've been working with them for over a year now, almost 2. I wouldn't be surprised if they made S-Class next year or the year after, which would mean they became S-Class at a younger age than you, right?" Naruto replied, attempting to get under Laxus's tad. Oddly, it didn't work because Laxus was already aware that Naruto was merely conversing. "HMPH. Tell me that when they actually become S-Class mages, shrimp." "Get going already," Laxus said, concluding the conversation by donning his headphones. Ignoring the stairs, Naruto jumped down to the first floor, grabbing a mission request from the board with a small laugh. With her arms folded across her expanding chest, Mira questioned, "What took you so long?" Without responding to his partner's query, Naruto pointed at the mission request and moved toward the bar counter. Mira simply followed the blonde and huffed back. Naruto Uzumaki and Mira Strauss reporting for an S-class mission, Master. Makarov drank his beer for a few more seconds before slamming it down on the table in an apparently inebriated manner. Mira perspired and said, "Huh, what did you say to me, Naruto-chan?" But Naruto maintained an entirely serious expression. In a monotonous tone, Naruto asked, "Should I take over as master for today, master?" Makarov's drunken senses vanished instantly, and he shook his head, his mind becoming crystal clear. The blonde was still too young and far too easy and complacent, far more so than Makarov, even though he might become a strong and outstanding guild master in the future. Hell, Makarov was positive Naruto would rather let the fight drag on until it was over if there was a bar fight. It was entertaining, is probably what Naruto would say in that ever cheesy tone if someone asked him why the blonde didn't stop the fight. It was therefore not shocking when Makarov quickly lost nearly all of the alcohol that was making his head feel foggy. Before removing the stamp, Makarov stood erect and coughed into his fist. He was surprised to learn that the blonde had been on Myra's to kill list just a few months prior. "What mission do you want today?" "Oh, you're going with Mira?" In a matter of months, he had succeeded in gaining her trust, which would be remarkable if he could change her opinion of him enough for her to even put up with him. The papers slid across the counter by Naruto. Makarov looked at it and was instantly intrigued. "You're going on a mid-S class mission. What happened to going on the lower level missions?" Makarov passed the stamped request back to the blonde without waiting for Naruto's response, knowing that Naruto would be alright and that Mira, being an S-class candidate and a strong one at that, would be alright as well. That blonde had that sage mode up his sleeve in case something went wrong. Naruto muttered, "Don't worry, Gigi-san. It's just for experience for little Mira over here," gesturing with his thumb to the girl beside him. Though it was all in jest, Mira growled and gave Naruto a shoulder punch. In response to Mira's threat, the blonde simply rubbed his shoulders and laughed. "I'm still older than you, Naruto, so watch it." After saying, whatever you say, whatever you say, Naruto turned around and started to head for the door. The blonde waved his hand over his shoulder and said, "See you, Gigi-san." After catching up to the blonde, Mira briefly pivoted to wave to the master before turning straight once more and conversing with the blonde. As the two walked away, happily chatting, Makarov gazed at them. He then let out a sigh as the two left the guild and vanished from his view. The guild master picked up his beer and took a long gulp, finishing the entire cup in one sitting. "Kids, they grow up too fast. Mira is already an S-class candidate, and so is little Urza-chan. It won't be long either until the rest of Naruto's team catches up. I need a drink." Naruto and Mira were strolling through the streets outside the guild, with Mira bouncing a little. Since this was her first S-class mission with the blonde, it wasn't shocking that she was so excited. Being on an S-class mission with the blonde meant much more than just that she was strong. It also meant that he trusted her enough to accompany him and was aware of her skills and strengths to work well with her in practically any circumstance. Or at least that's what he claimed he could do with Natsu, Gray, and Kana. Mira turned to face Naruto, who, judging by the expression on his face, appeared to be a little disturbed for some reason. With a sarcastic drawl, Mira said, "What's wrong? Something making you scared?" Naruto scoffed in amusement, losing his troubled expression and turning his face toward her. The blonde turned back to the mission request that was spread out in his hands and said, "Of course not. It's just," Myra's eyebrows shot up in bewilderment as she said, "I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with this mission, but there's a piece of the puzzle that's missing." "Didn't you say that you didn't like lacking information during missions?" The brunette gave a nod. Myra's eyebrows went up even higher as a result of this action, which only made her more perplexed. The blonde folded the paper and sealed it, a tiny cloud of smoke blocking his arm's view until a tiny kanji painting appeared on his right arm. "Then why would you choose that mission?" he asked. At the edge of town, the blonde turned left to return to the training clearing in the forest, but otherwise just kept staring straight ahead. Naruto snarled, his desire to kill briefly leaking out of him before vanishing as swiftly as it had appeared. "Experience. You need to learn how to take S-class missions, even if there is a lack of information. Sometimes, you have to take requests, especially ones like these." Mira was intrigued by this. What could have enraged Naruto, who is typically composed and analytical? Naruto lifted his hand to his temple, rubbed it, and then gently palmed his face, asking, What's the mission information and requirements? The idea of battling such formidable mages made Mira smile viciously. Our mission has two parts to it. The first part is to wipe out a dark guild, which was multiple S-class mages in there to deal with. She waited patiently for Naruto to finish, though, rather than voicing her opinions. And the second part is to try and recover all of the women that have disappeared from the town, all of them from ages 12 to 40. You know where they went and what's happening to the women. Mira's expression darkened with anger and she instantly stopped smirking. She fully understood Naruto's meaning and the pain endured by the women who had been abducted and taken prisoner. Scums! She exclaimed, unable to contain her rage any longer. Any man who pushed himself on women in that way, using his position of authority, ought to be killed. She was aware that she wouldn't kill them. At most, she would send them to the Rune Knights with only a few broken bones, but it would be very nearly fatal. She, along with the rest of the Fury Kingdom and Fairy Tail, did not believe in killing. Naruto gave a solemn nod, but then he grinned. And that's why, I'm going to go all out on this mission, to show you what a real S-class mage can do, said the man. Mira's angry expression quickly gave way to one of mild surprise and then excitement. When it came to their spars, Naruto had never really gone all out. As they sparred, it actually appeared as though he was carefully rerouting their strikes to the correct form. Thus, Mira felt a little giddy inside at the thought of seeing the blonde go all out, but she was also a little scared. Could he be another guild arts? Yes, Mira had at last come clean and told herself that Naruto was not only stronger than her, but perhaps even leagues stronger than her. It was still winter, and the leaves on the ground crunched beneath Naruto's boots. They returned to the clearing after a few more minutes of silence, the A-class mage sort of following her superior. They were all engaged in the same activity. Training. As the Dragon Slayer spewed fire from his mouth in tiny fireballs, each of which created a tiny explosion in the air, Happy was flying around Natsu. They turned to face the blonde and focused on him as soon as they heard Naruto's footsteps. Mira and I are going on an S-class mission. I'll be seeing you in around 6 hours later. Do what you want. Party, fight at the guild, wreak havoc, but no drinking. Kana's face began to droop after the final one. See you guys later. Then, with Mira's eyes widening from the encounter, Naruto turned around and put his hands on her shoulder before the two vanished from the clearing in a flash of orange. Place. Train car. Taking a sip of her water, Mira questioned, why couldn't you just teleport us to the mission site? With his arms relaxed across his chest, Naruto was leaning back in his chair. With a sigh, Mira leaned back in her chair and put her chin in her palm. I can only teleport to Seals. That's why we were able to teleport to the train station and buy a ticket before the train left. Both she and Naruto were bored, though he was currently keeping himself busy by forming a tiny blue vortex of some kind over his right palm. With a hint of curiosity, Mira said, "What are you doing?" Instead of reacting, the blonde turned off the circular spinning vortex and allowed it to vanish. Then he said something. "It's nothing. Just a basic pure magic manipulation control exercise," Naruto said, lowering his hand to his elbow. Now utterly fascinated, Mira leaned forward in her chair, wondering how the blonde could have figured out how to use magic in that form so precisely. Her tone was a little demanding as she said, "Show me, or at least teach me." Naruto sighed, thinking that perhaps providing her with something to do would keep her busy since he knew she was bored. She would gain strength and control, if anything, but then again, mastering the chakra was a remarkable achievement. Mastering Itorano, which is lighter than chakra, would likely be far more difficult. Mira raised her hand to shoulder height and then glared at her open palm, stating, "Try and direct your magic right above your palm, but not your Satan soul, but just your magic." The open palm did nothing. The blonde sneered, "It's not working, Naruto." Mira pouted briefly before attempting to control her magic to its purest form while glaring at her hand. "Of course not. It took me years to gain my perfect control." Naruto sighed to himself. Even though he claimed it was a simple control exercise, it was at least 20 times more difficult than learning to walk on water. He would be surprised if, within a year, she could even create an unstable magical form of his Rasengan. Naruto sagged against the cushion and slid down, lying on the long seat in a comfortable sleeping position, saying, "I'm going to sleep. Wake me up at our stop." Mira remained focused on her palm and did not answer. Time difference. 2 hours, Mira whispered to Naruto, "That's a really large building, and why is it in the middle of nowhere?" Out of sight behind a few big rocks in the desolate wasteland, the two were standing a few hundred meters from the building. Naruto responded, "These dark guilds are stupid," and then he ducked back under the rock's cover, with Mira imitating his movement. As though she were a secret agent, Mira pressed her back against the cool rock surface and asked, "So, what's the plan?" Naruto suppressed his laughter. He had lived the life of a ninja and knew how to play the role. He was the greatest ninja of his era. Hell, if he had been given another 10 years, neither Madara nor Hashirama could have been even close to him. He was sure of that. He wouldn't even have to use Biju Sage Mode or complete Biju Sage Mode, let alone Kyuubi Chakra Mode. Naruto took out a paintbrush and gestured to the Dark Guild building behind him, using quick, deliberate strokes. I'm going to make a seal so that no one can leave unless they are a woman, so just give me some time to make a large gender barrier seal around the building. Mira questioned curiously, what if there are women in the Dark Guild? After pausing with his paintbrush, Naruto resumed his movements. If there are women that are a part of the Dark Guild that enjoy to rape other women, then by all means, enjoy taking them out. Naruto replied with a slight smirk. The blonde was finally starting to understand her and speak her language, so Mira grinned too. In a snarly, sadistic voice, Mira whispered excitedly, now you're talking the way I like it, you cheeky blonde. Naruto laughed, but he continued to make expert seal motions. At last, he put his arm down by his side, closed his paintbrush, and uttered the words, "One world." Fuan, seal. The blonde released a noticeable surge of energy. As Mira gazed at the building, she saw a tiny cubic barrier forming around the massive structure before disappearing into thin air in the afternoon light and wind. With a cunning grin on her face and her muscles clenched for combat, Mira questioned, what next? When Naruto raised his hand to face level, it started to cackle with lightning, wind, and water. As the liquid combined with the lightning to intensify the potent combination of elements, a vortex formed around his hand. Naruto said authoritatively, don't you already know, Mira? We do what we do best as fairy tale mages, property destruction and charge in without reserves. Commence the mission. He then vanished into thin air and reappeared hundreds of meters above the ground, encircling the original blonde with hundreds of clones. Although charging in wasn't the best course of action, particularly for a ninja who was meant to blend in and stay unseen, Earthland was somewhat different. Although anyone could kill, there were still mages who did so. The issue of civilians in the vicinity of a mage battle was also problematic, and there was a chance that they would be taken hostage, but that was the purpose of his clones. They were instructed to charge into the Dark Guild, rampage through it, and recover as many of the captured women as they could while eliminating as many dark mages as they could with their limited chakra. After arriving at the guild's front door, Mira pushed it open and unleashed Satan's soul by using her most powerful magic. The demon. Voiced words, "Let's do this," reverberated throughout the guild building's first floor. Naruto, who heard it just before he and his 100 clones crashed through the roof, remained in full mission mode and maintained his solemn expression. Errors would not be accepted, particularly when it came to innocent women who had been somewhat robbed of their innocence. Naruto straightened his body as all of the clones crashed through the roof and landed on the top floor, hiding everything from view with a massive cloud of smoke, dust, falling debris, and broken wood. The expression on the faces of all his clones was the same. Game time had arrived. Search through everything. Do not hold back and release all of your gravity seals and resistance seals if necessary. Go. All of the clones didn't wait. They didn't want to risk the women's lives, so they released their seals right away. Without the seals, the original Naruto felt incredibly light and powerful. The blonde's chakra levels suddenly exploded, easily surpassing 4 cages and creating a huge golden pillar of light that split the clouds in the sky. Wisps of chakra violently swirled around the pillar, creating a torrential wind. However, I said I would go all out, especially since there are multiple S-class mages in this building currently, so that should get the attention of the mages in this stupid place. Since the 30 or so dark mages on the first floor were all grunts, the weak members of the Dark Guild, Mira was able to deal with them with ease. After dropping to the ground, she executed a sweeping kick that completely spun around and dropped the 3 dark mages that had surrounded her. "Evil push!" exclaimed Mira as she swiftly raised both of her arms in the direction of the falling mages and then whirled around, expelling her magic from her hands. Before the B-rank mages were violently expelled from the guild and crashed through the bar counter and guild walls, a seal briefly appeared next to the 3 and brightened. "TCH, so weak," the Strauss said arrogantly as he gazed down at the mages who were all unconscious on the ground. She moved in the direction of the stairs, and then she sensed it. Pressure that is absolute. An enormous amount of power and magical reserves that are nearly unmatched. Mira was aware of her boundaries, even if Satan's soul made her more bold and conceited. "I have to get Naruto and get out of here. We can't fight a monster like, wait, that magical presence feels almost soothing." Mira was unaware that Naruto had the ability to direct his killing intent toward particular targets. Additionally, his ability to manipulate wind was holding up his absurd chakra levels, which would normally press down on any other mage. Thinking, it doesn't matter, I have to find Naruto first. Mira hurried up the stairs to the second floor and landed a solid punch on a member of the Dark Guild, sending him flying through the wall and out of the guild in a defenseless heap. The situation was completely different upstairs on the fourth floor, where the Naruto clones were already causing chaos from the second to the top floor. This would be a high S-class mission because the blonde was looking directly at 7 mages, all of whom he knew to be low to mid S-class mages. A tiny trickle of perspiration trickled down the blonde's neck, but he maintained a professional poker face. Damn it, I knew there was something missing in the request. I'm really going to have to go all out. Releasing my seals from before won't be enough to handle 7. My clones would be taken out from a single punch, and I don't have time to make them more durable. The sounds of devastation reverberated throughout the guild building as the two groups exchanged glances. So, you're the famous Storm, Seems like you're a bit taller than everyone says, one of the 7 remarked mockingly. Naruto calmly asked, and if I am? Without pausing to listen to the 7 disparage each other. He will give them time to cherish life in their final moments. The ground was almost collapsing beneath the blonde due to the pressure of the golden chakra that encircled him and his 3 primary affinities. But the S-class mages in front of the blonde were barely able to cope with the unbridled pressure. Another said, nothing. We'll just take care of you and get all of our women back, and then add wanted after today, with an air of superiority. As Naruto released increasing amounts of pressure and his chakra levels increased even further, his face darkened. He snarled, I won't let you out. As a group, the 7 laughed without amusement. Naruto's face darkened even more as he managed his rage, his eyes alternating between red, gold, and blue. Kid, it's 7 on 1. There's nothing you can do. Your clones aren't here to help you. Just go home and we'll take care of the girl. Trust us, we'll take good care of her. At that point, Naruto was given the memories of each of his clones. I can make thousands of clones at my whim, and numbers were never a problem for me, even if I'm just a single person. I could just spam clones, but you all deserve punishment. The memories arranged themselves in his mind for 5 seconds. Naruto's expression shifted from one of restrained rage to outright rage once they had arranged themselves in order. His eyes flushed as the blonde's surrounding chakra blended with the purified golden chakra to turn a crimson red, whirling and twisting in a malevolent maelstrom. As the swirling energy encircled the blonde and started to seep into him, Naruto knelt down. Naruto's chakra levels exploded again, exponentially growing, and he screamed in defiance and rage when all the pent-up energy could no longer be contained. Now that the blonde's reserves were obviously superior to theirs, the 7 dark mages realized their danger. They also learned about the fate of the Dark Guild that had threatened him by mentioning his girl team member, but they didn't think a 14-year-old teenager could have nearly destroyed a guild on his own. They were going to pay now for threatening Mira in front of him. You, Naruto snarled, staring at the ground with his bangs covering his face. Then his head snapped up, and he glared at them all with unbridled rage. All did it to a child, in front of her mother? Your future is. Naruto vanished in an instant, but the 7 mages flew out of the guild building and crashed through the walls before colliding with the barrier he had previously erected. They hit the barrier so hard that most of their bones were broken. However, Naruto witnessed Mira leap out of the building at that very moment, tumbling wildly on the floor before safely navigating the barrier. Naruto glanced past Mira and saw all of the young girls and women standing just outside the barrier, looking at the building with concern and anxiety. Naruto then saw a man emerge from the first floor's smoke and debris, walking out of the building calmly and slowly, as though he were the strongest person in the world, even if he were against Naruto. His eyes bore into the man's figure, and the blonde glared down with scornful eyes. When he was able to see it clearly, he saw that it was an older teen, maybe 18 years old. His eyes were the same shade of ocean blue as Naruto's, and he had silver hair that hung down to the small of his back. With rage in his voice, Naruto yelled, "Death!" as he exploded off the 4th floor and flew at the newcomer. Naruto saw the amazing release of magical energy as the man turned and looked at the blonde in disbelief before simply blocking it with his hand. Naruto applied pure chakra manipulation to his attack, increasing the force of his punch until he completely overpowered the teen's defenses, blowing him away and crashing against the barrier. Something felt wrong about that magic. It was way too dense. Almost like chakra. But the silver-haired one smirked and stepped back straight. He laughed as he remarked, "A chakra user, didn't expect to meet one in my life after those 2. Naruto's eyes narrowed suspiciously at once. It was believed that chakra had perished and vanished from existence. Chakra shouldn't have been possible in the first place. Naruto snarled, his voice becoming more and more savage by the moment. How do you know chakra? His anger had reached a breaking point. He was just now barely conscious. The teenager smirked, patted his somewhat soiled shirt, and then put his hands together and executed hand seals. He exclaimed with delight, because I'm a chakra user myself. As lightning started to cackle around his shape. Even as lightning started to come at him at unbelievable speeds, Naruto's eyes widened in shock and he remained motionless, staring straight ahead. When he was struck by the lightning technique, the surrounding area was devastated by a massive explosion that left a large crater as earth and debris flew in all directions. Naruto! Mira cried out, coughing instantly afterward from the agony of the chest kick she had just received. She heaved, keeling over and falling to her knees. One of the women approached her and gave her a back pat. The woman said, "Are you all right, our savior?" Mira turned weakly over to the woman after she had finished dry heaving and nodded her head, observing that the woman was beautiful even in her current state. Even though she had bags under her eyes and appeared undernourished, she still exuded a clear beauty. The woman instantly shook her head and said, "I'm no savior, we just received a request for a mission and decided to take it." Mira was about to correct the woman and claim that Naruto wasn't her friend when she said, "No, you saved us from those scum." But, what happened to your friend? Since she genuinely cared about him and was concerned about him, what was he if she claimed he wasn't a friend? Mira said, "I don't know," as she turned to face the dust storm. Mira and the other women breathed a sigh of relief as the screen of smoke and dust cleared. Naruto glared directly at the teenager in front of him, completely unharmed. Naruto's direct comments seemed to offend the teenager, who pointed at himself and said, "Such weak lightning. You think that will take care of me? Who do you think you are, scum?" "I'm Oni Tuchi, the most powerful mage and chakra user in Fury." "Pathetic," Naruto remarked with amusement. He had to care for hundreds of mages, the majority of whom were taken care of by his clones. Then, someone claimed to be able to use chakra, but he was so poor at it, at least in comparison to him, that he was no longer able to take the mission seriously. "What were you saying?" Naruto watched carelessly as Oni screamed, "I'll show you, you little freak of nature," before performing a fresh round of hand seals. Anything the teenager threw at him, he could easily take, especially with his chakra armor. Edo Tensai. A coffin abruptly rose from the ground, causing the silver-haired teenager to scream. Naruto's eyes widened in shock before he gave the teenager a hateful glare. "Who teached you that? Are you going to defile the dead?" When the coffin lid opened and the second Hokage emerged, Oni merely grinned in reply. "Why am I being called back? Is it impossible for a deceased man to find peace?" Before noticing Naruto covered in his red and golden chakra, the second Hokage of Konoha spoke in a weary tone, "Such high chakra levels, who are you, boy?" The man in front of Naruto was a legend, but he knew that if he fought with all of his strength, the Hokage would eventually lose. "You remind me of someone, although he was older when I met him, and I was dead at that time, too," Naruto said, his shocked expression giving way to one of seriousness as his anger faded and his red chakra was replaced by pure golden chakra. Even though the second Hokage knew who he was, he just raised an eyebrow when he said, "I am Uzumaki Naruto." The Hokage dropped into a fighting stance and said coolly, "Well, the idiot who summoned me behind me is forcing me to fight you, although he can only make me fight at about 50% with his current reserves." Naruto simply stared at the Hokage and then spoke one word with a tone that was almost lazy. Naruto dropped his chakra levels, the coating of golden chakra receding back into his body, the blonde's eyes turning from red and golden back to his normal blue, and he watched solemnly until the Hokage vanished in pieces of paper on the wind. Before he turned to glare at the silver-haired teen, who still had that eternal smirk on his face, Naruto said, "Fuin, seal." Naruto was more shocked the more he heard this idiot say, "Interesting," changing the seal from outside the barrier so that not only no men could leave, but also no dead were allowed inside. Oni wasn't very strong, but he was familiar with seals. Naruto declared emphatically, "I'm not very to say that, I'm going to have to kill you," and Oni simply grinned once more before mockingly saluting the blonde. "I recognize you as the fourth shinobi war hero. I now understand that you were never dead in the first place, which is why I was unable to even call you back to life." Naruto looked on passively before pointing a finger at the teenager. Oni said in insane delight. Boom. One seal exploded after lighting up from beneath the teen's feet. Naruto calmly watched as the dust settled and wasn't shocked to see the area gone. Obviously, he is skilled at using clones. The Hokage's statement that he would only be able to fight at 50% now makes sense. Why couldn't I just move on from my past for Kami's sake? However, Naruto was taken out of his thoughts when one of the S-class mages moaned out, "Leader, how did you treat him?" After glancing to check on Mira, Naruto turned to face the dark mages on the floor and then turned to face the women outside, then turned to face each of the fallen mages on the dirt floor. You mean leader? Whatever. That was a clone. Your leader was never here in the first place. The S-class mage simply stared at Naruto in shock. What am I going to do then? Naruto moved in the direction of the fallen mage and gave him a serious look. You S-class mages are so frail that they can be defeated by a single blow, but who am I to condemn pansies like you who exploit weaker women? The beautiful women outside of this barrier, the same women you have tormented and caused suffering to, will administer your punishment, not me. Well, after I knock you all out, of course. Naruto then gave the man a powerful punch to the temple, easily rendering him inoperable. Skip in time. 1 week. Naruto never told Mira what had transpired inside the barrier. Not only had he altered the seal to eliminate all dead creatures, but he had also installed a silencing seal at the exact moment the Tuchi morons started babbling, beginning with the word, chakra. Naruto swiveled in his chair and gazed out the window, observing the rain that had begun just a few minutes earlier as a little sprinkle and swiftly grown into a torrent of water. This is a bad sign. When will the S-class mages return from their trials? After closing the diary he had been reading moments earlier and putting it on the shelf, Naruto sighed and put on some casual clothes to officially end his lazy day. He wore a warm gray jacket over a red sweater, blue denim jeans, and a white scarf that wrapped snugly around his neck. After putting on his shoes and leaving his room and apartment, the blonde left. He felt a strong negative emotion immediately take over his senses. It was clearly from a powerful mage, S-class level at that, and it was accompanied by feelings of sadness and disappointment, along with a hint of jealousy and anger. Naruto accelerated his pace out of the complex and started running, using the negative emotion to determine the person's location. To stay dry, he used a small amount of elemental control to create a sort of water umbrella above himself. He had already reached a clearing after running for almost 10 minutes. This was the training clearing where he and his group trained every day, but it was deserted because it had started to get dark. The only person there was curled up against herself on the floor, leaning against a tree, with her arms wrapped around her knees as she sobbed to herself. Mira, Naruto whispered, his voice muffled by the rain. The blonde approached the trembling girl but got no answer, even when he was only 5 feet away. When he was directly in front of her, she looked up with tears in her eyes to see Naruto's worried expression. How are you? Do you feel chilly? Naruto asked, not wanting to discuss the S-class trials because he already knew what had happened based on her behavior, and instead of answering, Mira started crying again, but even more intensely. She had failed the S-class trials primarily because she had the worst luck in the world, and then Naruto found her when she was emotionally weak in some way, and instead of asking how the trials went or making fun of her, which she believed was possible because she hadn't exactly welcomed him in his first year at the guild, he just asked if she was okay. In a way, this hurt her even more because he had so much faith that she would succeed because S-class this year had given her confidence, only to fail. In addition, he had spent a lot of time training with her and helping her become a better person, so she felt like she had failed Naruto as well. The blonde was instantly shocked. First of all, Mira would never behave in this manner. Second, he had no idea how to handle a girl in such a situation. He had never had any kind of intimate relationship with a girl because he was always so busy training and fighting in the front lines of the war. Nevertheless, he ignored the awkward feeling festering in his chest and dropped to his knees, leaning closer to Mira before putting his arms around her protectively. Rather than calming down, Mira started crying even more. Oh no, Kami. Why can't I console a girl when she needs support, even though I know how to handle S-class battles with ease? Naruto would be crying in his head for help if the situation weren't so depressing and serious, but he didn't have any help right now and he couldn't feel sorry for himself either, so he kept rubbing Mira's back slowly while remaining totally silent while the girl sobbed in her sorrow against his shoulder. Time paradoxes. Time paradoxes are stupid, for Kami's sake. Naruto was lying beneath the sheets in bed, gazing analytically at the ceiling. Naruto wasn't so dim-witted as to fail to grasp what was going on here, even though his father's notes on space, time jutsus didn't contain much about time paradoxes. The world of Fury, the future of the elemental nations, might have turned into an alternate universe as a result of his arrival. Things that were never supposed to happen came to pass as a result of his entry into the future. He was the cause of the time paradoxes. Every action has a specific response. It's possible that the 3 other chakra using individuals were the reactions to Naruto's arrival. Naruto was almost positive that his assumptions were partially accurate, but he wasn't positive. But there was no way to demonstrate that the 3 other chakra using individuals were responding to his arrival. And would he prove it by disappearing or by killing himself? Furthermore, at least 3 people were able to use chakra, suggesting that there may be more. Damn it, Naruto uttered, clutching his bed linens with annoyance. Shikamaru would be far more adept at this. The blonde was never good at deduction or analysis. With his head still tilted toward the ceiling, Naruto sat up in bed and leaned against the wall beside his bed, pressing his head and back against the wall. It shouldn't be too difficult to obtain the body parts or DNA. But, how did that Tucci guy know how to do the Edo Tensei? The DNA of a dead person or corpse would remain for centuries or even thousands of years, and even longer if properly preserved. Naruto wouldn't be shocked if Oni Tucci had found the second Hokage's DNA using healing methods and other jutsus, particularly forbidden jutsus. Everyone would probably find something if they put in enough effort to look for it. That most likely wasn't the case for Tucci. The young man with silver hair, also known as an elder teen, had likely been exposed to chakra at an early age and had received items from an ancestor or portions of the second Hokage's remaining body. Alternatively, obtaining even a single living cell of the dead Hokage would be sufficient. Medical jutsus would speed up cell replication to complete the task quickly. The blonde had an unsettling thought. What if the other two or more individuals were also proficient in the strictly prohibited Edo Tensei technique? Then what? Naruto growled in anger and anticipation. He was a little nervous, if he wasn't lying to himself. Time traveling had a lot of unknowns and variables. Would he eventually vanish, or would his presence cause this world to change even more? How much did his straightforward life, his friendship with the guild members, and his interactions with his team and other mages his age alter everyone in Fairy Tail? The blonde gazed blankly up at the ceiling for a moment before laughing. What about Kana? How would she be different if I never came to Fairy Tail and wasn't caught by Madara's Kamui? She asked. He thought of all the others, including Mira, Urza, Gray, Natsu, and even Happy and Makarov, and soon stopped laughing quietly to himself. Hey, she would probably be drinking without reserve if I was never here. He honestly didn't know anything about them. Their friendships, their personalities, their attitudes, their strengths and weaknesses. However, there was one thing he knew for sure. He was never supposed to be here. He might have been dead, gone, or just a passing of an existence. However, he was still alive and present. Naruto's eyes focused and his gaze hardened. Tomorrow, Guildarts would depart for his SS class mission, the 100-year mission. Tonight was a farewell party for him. Naruto debated whether or not to do it for a short while. His mind struggled bitterly against their fight for a few moments before he sighed and gave in. He didn't know enough. The most he could do was reconnaissance, which he could do on his missions against dark guilds, since he needed information before he could do anything important. But when the time came, he would need to fortify his resolve. He would act regardless of what his team or others thought of his choice. What about Kana? What would she do if I left? Would she drink? And Mira, would she become aggressive again? Naruto asked, his eyes shifting from the ceiling to the clock, which continued to tick away the seconds without any concern at all. Time was the only thing it was used for. In contrast to most ninjas, Naruto typically expressed his emotions and carried out his moral convictions during missions. He developed his own nindo, or ninja style. He battled for both protection and salvation, but when the time came, he would be a real ninja, one whose sole goal was to finish his mission. He wouldn't give a damn about the others because he had something to attend to. When no one was looking at him, he would leave the guild. He would vanish from Fairy Tail until he had accomplished his task. Oni Tucci, and the other two or more, I'm coming for you, and I will kill you. Naruto, come on, open the door and let's go. Natsu's yell from outside his apartment and his stern knock on the door snapped the blonde out of his reverie. With a sigh, Naruto got out of bed and hurried to the door, where he changed into a random outfit he had grabbed from his closet. The door creaked silently as Naruto opened it and asked, "What is it?" From the tiny gap in the door, Natsu's ecstatic expression was visible. Yawning, Naruto yanked the door open, allowing Natsu and his team to enter. "Hey, don't be like that. Open the door all the way," he said. When the blonde noticed Mira waiting outside in the hallway, leaning against the wall with her arms folded across her chest, his eyes widened a little. For a moment, the two stared at one another without saying anything. "Well, are you going to invite me in? Do you want to come in?" At the same moment, both of them inquired. With a small, weary smile, Naruto turned around and entered the living room, waving Mira inside his apartment. Kana, Happy, Natsu, and Gray had already settled into the couches. Naruto had purchased additional furnishings because they came at least twice a week. When Naruto came into the living room and took a seat in a chair, Natsu asked in a happy voice, "Seriously, how much did you pay for these couches?" The words, "couple 10,000 jewels each," were spoken casually by Naruto. Everyone's eyes widened in surprise. with the exception of Happy, who had just moments earlier been eating the sushi that Naruto had placed in front of the Exceed. What? They all cried together, with Happy being the exception once more. Naruto leaned back against the chair and pressed against the meager amount of cushion, grunting in frustration. The blonde yawned and covered his mouth with his hand. "Speak quieter, please. I just woke up," he said. "You guys remember how much S-class mission pay, right?" The blonde sweat drop appeared to form as the others all appeared to realize. How could they forget something that was so easy to recall? How had the other person blocked Naruto's punch? This was a question Mira had wanted to ask the blonde ever since the mission was over. But she thought it would be better to ask later, or at least when she and Naruto were alone. She assumed that everything that took place inside was intended to be kept secret because she was aware that the blonde had placed a silencing seal on top of the barrier. Normally, she would just ask without taking any precautions, but Naruto seemed to have a lot of questions about him. Naruto was mysterious. There were hardly any pieces to fit together, so there was no puzzle to finish. Although the blonde was gregarious and enjoyable to be around, he was actually quite private. Did he come from under a rock? That was obviously untrue. Natsu was actually living under a rock for years. Well, he was in a cave, so that counts as under a rock, doesn't it? Most people would just assume the blonde was kidding. The important thing to remember was that Mira was aware of Naruto's lack of knowledge and background. Although she had her own suspicions, none of them even remotely matched the blonde's true history or origins. Not even close. After noticing the expression in Mira's eyes, Naruto mentally stored that information in a folder and decided to speak with her later. Natsu said, "So, are we going to go or not?" With a sigh, Naruto turned to face the pink-haired Dragonslayer. Natsu nodded enthusiastically. "You're talking about the going-away party for guild arts, right?" Naruto argued with himself. "Yeah. Can you believe he's going on an SS-class mission? That's so awesome." In the era of elemental nations, S-class missions were absurdly risky. SS-class missions were nearly impossible to complete and were essentially suicide missions. The Kages and very high S-rank ninjas would be the only ones who could succeed on their own. Since his father was the first person to ever obtain an SS rank and a flea on sight order in the bingo book, he would have also been among the select few ninjas who could have completed SS-class missions. Naruto was now either flee on sight or engage with extreme caution and numbers. Naruto gave himself a mental slap and turned back to Natsu, saying, "Then again, if I had just a few more years, I'm moping now." Sure, it's great that he's strong enough to take an SS-class mission, but it's extremely dangerous, the blonde calmly replied to Natsu's enthusiastic comment. With a frustrated sigh, Naruto closed his eyes and said, "Come on, we already take S-class mission, Naruto. How bad could adding another S to the mission be?" Naruto had repeatedly told Natsu that they were taking the lower-tier S-class missions, so Kana, Mira, and Gray had a rudimentary understanding of his perspective. It's the difference between a low A-class mission to a difficult S-class mission. Without any sugarcoating, it's a suicide mission for most S-class mages. Even guild arts will have difficulty to succeed, but there's still a chance. That wasn't what the five expected. With this knowledge, Natsu became somewhat sober, and the Dragonslayer reclined in his chair. Happy, Mira, and Gray all said nothing, silently pondering the blonde's words. For some reason, Kana took this information the hardest. Naruto gave her a quick glance before fixing his intense gaze on her with a hint of worry on his face. Her expression was troubled and worried. Naruto said, "Are you all right?" The tense atmosphere in the room was a far cry from the moments before. It only seemed to get worse after this question. Kana shook her head and glanced up. The brunette answered, "It's nothing. I'm just thinking about what you said." She then chuckled softly, but it sounded insincere. Naruto, the other teenagers, and the one Exceed at the table all said nothing. "But you're so far ahead of us that you might be able to take SS-class missions soon, right?" The 6 people in the room, including Natsu and Happy, who are usually animated and constantly talking, looked around the room in silence. "I'm sure that was a compliment, but I just said that SS-class missions were basically suicide missions for most mages." They were all considering a particular fairy tale ace who would be departing the following morning, possibly for the final time. "Meh, Naruto, you're such a party pooper," Natsu sulked like a little kid. Naruto turned to face Natsu and gave him a blank stare, saying, "Such a pessimist." Making fun of Natsu's intelligence, Naruto remarked, "I'm a realist, not a pessimist. By the way, since when did you actually start using somewhat complex words in sentences?" Ignoring it, the young Dragonslayer grinned broadly. "It's kind of hard not to when I'm around you for almost 2 years. Rather than grinning back, Naruto's expression clouded over and his face hardened a little. Naruto shuddered for a moment as he thought about his younger self. He wasn't exactly the smartest when it came to battle plans, but he was a genius of battle split-second decisions. Another thing I changed in this world because I'm here. Natsu's becoming smarter. Well, that's a good thing, at least. But if I didn't come, I can only imagine how stupid he would have been. He was certain now that he wasn't foolish. Declare to the world that Naruto was no longer a fool. Unfortunately, Naruto's education at the academy was a complete failure, which is why most people believed that he was stupid in his early years, until he was 16. Teachers would attempt to make mistakes in instruction everywhere in the academy so that he would die in the field as quickly as possible with false information in his head. The blonde was ignored if he ever asked questions, and everything the teachers taught Naruto was incorrect. It's easy to see why Naruto started pulling practical jokes. He was neglected. It was painful for him to be without a family, and it was even more painful in those days when he was completely blind and deaf and everyone hated him for something he didn't know. After briefly losing himself in his thoughts and losing himself in his past, Naruto quickly blinked his eyes to return to his surroundings. The gloomy atmosphere in the room had been easily wiped away, and the teenagers were once more chatting happily with one another. As the card's mistress placed the cards on the table and read their daily fortunes, Mira and Gray stood beside Kana. Natsu and Happy were kneeling on the floor, begging Kana to read their fortunes as well. With a suppressed smile, Naruto got up, moved to the wall window, and opened the sliding door to enter the veranda. In an instant, Mira was standing directly beside him. Leaning against the railing, Naruto looked out over the vast town in front of him, feeling the wind play with his hair spikes. When Natsu and the rest of the group hurried out to the veranda and started playing outside, that thought was dashed. Peaceful. The blonde closed his eyes in frustration and sighed. Can't I have at least a week of peace? Standing beside him, Mira leaned forward against the railing and gazed straight ahead at the town. The two didn't say anything, happy to let the quiet talk about how comfortable the air was for them. Naruto. The blonde responded by humming, showing that he was paying attention. The blonde stayed silent and kept staring at the town, now at the guild building, and said, I want to know what happened back at the mission. You haven't taken an S-class mission since then and have been acting strange ever since. Despite Naruto's slight jab at a joke, Mira maintained her serious demeanor and said, I don't think you had to state that I was acting strange, you know? If he could avoid answering every question, Naruto said, Fine, fine. What do you want to know about the mission? Any specifics you want to know? First of all, why did you create a silencing barrier? I know you made one since I saw your lips moving but I couldn't hear anything. Secondly, how did the guy block your punch? You said you were going all out, so how could he block it so easily? Thirdly, what was that power you had back then? It was almost suffocating. Mira listed the items on her mental list. With a wave of his hand, Naruto briefly turned to face Mira before turning away to observe that the other four were still having fun and were not at all disturbed by the conversation between him and Mira. While Mira frowned, Naruto smiled slightly and said, Well, I'll answer to the best of my ability then, Mira. For the first one, he was saying things that I'd rather keep secret to that people no one could hear it. I didn't just create a silencing barrier on top of the guild, but made it around me and him only. For the second one, the guy knew seals. Mira opened her eyes. Wait, don't you only know how to use seals? I thought it was ridiculously hard to learn. Naruto gave a slow nod. After considering Naruto's evaluation of the silver-haired mage, Mira thought, it is hard to learn. He created a physical defense seal that could block against anything physical, no matter how powerful or large it is. This also means that I could have punched him lightly or even tapped him, and then socked him as hard as I could, which would have resulted in a severely injured idiot. Then why was he uninjured when he crashed against the barrier? Another seal that surrounded his body. I would place him at level 5 at most though. The seal was only able to block once. Also, it stopped working almost instantly after I began to use pure magic manipulation to break through his guard. I could probably make it work 5 or more times, and anything less than an A-class attack wouldn't count as an attack. Mira said, That many? In a tone of surprise and silence, Naruto grinned. Naruto remarked, sounding a little arrogant, seals can do anything. You just need to know how to use them. Mira frowned once more but conceded that his statement had some merit. Without a doubt, Naruto's seals were incredibly versatile, to the point of absurdity. Naruto turned away from Mira and gazed at the mountains that stretched beyond the town's landscape. Anyways, for the last question, you said what that power was? That was simply me going all out. However, Mira didn't need to know that. Well, all out without using any of my modes. The girl's shocked eyes widened once more. Mira questioned incredulously, that was just pure power. There was a great deal of power. When the Strauss sensed it, there was a purity that made her feel at ease, but there was also a hint of something demonic. The demonic energy had changed into a purer form, and it seemed as though the purity was the exterior. The power within the pure power was utterly demonic, even more so than her Satan soul. Naruto remained silent, gazing blankly into space as he transported himself back in time. He would undoubtedly be much stronger now if he had Kurama, but with Kurama, his 14-year-old self would undoubtedly crush his other 14-year-old self. The cause, why? Naruto's chakra control was terrible at the time, and he had no idea how to use Kurama or even Sage Mode. With the exception of the most challenging and chakra-intensive skills, the blonde could now use jutsus without even making hand seals because he had nearly perfect chakra control over his affinities. "Hey Naruto. Can we get lunch, because I'm starving?" Natsu said from the railing, standing straight and balancing himself with his feet on top of the metal rails. Naruto snapped out of his reverie and gave the Dragon Slayer a smile. The blonde said, "Sure. Let's eat out," in a tone of agreement. Happy mimicked Natsu's fist-pumping motion as he cheered. Mira briefly softened her stern face as Kana and Gray grinned broadly. When Kana, Gray, Natsu, and Happy entered the living room and made their way to the front door, Naruto's smile vanished. "I might as well, since this will be my last day here for a while, won't it?" But when he turned to Mira, he forced a phony smile onto his face. With a broad smile, Naruto asked in a lighthearted manner, "You coming or what?" With her shoes tapping on his apartment's wooden floor, Mira stared at the blonde for a moment before walking past him silently. The blonde sighed, losing his joyful expression. Naruto straightened up and went outside, trailing only a few seconds behind the other members of the group who were already on the streets, saying, "Wow, way to ignore me, Mira. Where are we going to eat?" Kana inquired excitedly from the front. Every time Naruto took the group out to dinner, it was always a sumptuous meal at some kind of upscale eatery. He had taken so many S-class missions that he had enough jewels to pay anyhow. Naruto refrained from laughing. This was a 15-year-old girl who was very excited about a single meal and would probably grow up to be an S-class mage by the following year. However, if it had been me in the past, I would have been content with any meal. That's probably why I was so happy every time Iruka-sensei bought me ramen from Ichiraku's. Naruto's thoughts were interrupted by an odd thought. Technically, he was nearly 20. It had been just over 2 years since he had crashed into Earthland and caused a time paradox, and he was 18 when he vanished from the elemental nations. The blonde turned to see the group, which included Mira, waiting in front of a well-known eatery. "Hey Naruto, what about here?" she asked. Natsu drank alcohol for the first time there, though the Dragon Slayer didn't think it was particularly tasty. Naruto said, "Sure, let's eat here." After a brief pause, with a cheer, Natsu kicked open the doors and stormed into the restaurant. Some children simply never learn tact, the blonde sighed. 6-hour time skip. Anger made Naruto's eyes twitch. The party wasn't the reason. No, the blonde had a great time at the farewell party. An all-out guild fight was the inevitable conclusion of a few amusing little activities, including a tug-of-war and a few random games. But this time, guild arts was added. Naruto made the sensible choice to remain behind Makarov and grinned as he saw Natsu and several other Fairy Tail members charge at guild arts only to be blown back. It was interesting to note that Laxus had entered the battle and immediately targeted guild arts. For 10 seconds, Naruto and the master observed with curiosity. Guild arts was playing with the S-class mage before he took him out completely, and the Thunder Make blonde mage was out in about a minute. Naruto wasn't even irritated that master had included him in the conflict. The blonde had skillfully sidestepped every attack that came her way. It had been almost an hour since the guild fight began. It was the person in front of Naruto that was causing his eyes to twitch with annoyance and irritation. Kana was inebriated. Not just a little bit, but so inebriated that her cheeks were flushed. With just 1 drop of sake, it was nearly as awful as Rock Lee. The blonde said firmly, "Kana, what did I say about drinking?" In her inebriated days, Kana disregarded the tone and leaned in the direction of the blonde who was seated on a stool at the bar counter. The brunette pouted when she leaned in until their faces were just a few inches apart and Naruto's expression remained unchanged. "But I'm 15, so it's legal for me to drink now," she said in a very slurred reply. Her drunken breath passed over Naruto's face while he gazed passively. "At moments like these, I really wish that my nose wasn't so sensitive. I still don't think you should drink, Kana. It isn't healthy and you're acting strange." Kana leaned forward even further, practically sitting on Naruto's lap as she gazed at him with a red face. The blonde briefly raised his eyebrows before tensing up. "Hey, Naruto. What do you think of me?" he asked. "Oh shit, I'm in this situation. Arrow. Senin, I wish you could help me now." Naruto couldn't help but laugh aloud as he saw the perverted toad sage sitting somewhere in the guild building, sipping a beer, surrounded by a ton of attractive women. The pervert then turned to smile at Naruto before disappearing. Naruto was forced to look up at Kana when she abruptly slapped his cheeks with both of her hands. For a moment, the two gazed at one another, one expectantly, the other apathetically, but Naruto's apathy was concealing his internal confusion. "Hey, answer my question. What do you think of me?" Naruto closed his eyes and sighed. "Maybe I can wave off the question. Kami, why'd I have to have no experience on this stuff?" For some reason, or perhaps it wasn't so strange if the blonde had any tact in relationships, Kana gave the blonde a heated glare. "Kana, you definitely had too much to drink. Let's get you home." Abruptly, she dropped her grip on his cheeks and pressed her finger hard against his chest, leaning closer to his face. "You like Mira, don't you? I saw you two act all close to each other. You?" Kana's loud voice and accusations were cut off when Naruto swiftly covered her mouth with his hand. He glanced around covertly and was a little taken aback to see that only half of the guild had heard what Kana had said. Naruto would never understand how the guild could hear some random nonsense from across the guild hall during a bar fight. Unless, of course, they had some absurd hearing. You guys saw and heard nothing," he said, sounding a little ashamed. The guild's sober and inebriated faces merely gazed at Naruto and Kana. The blonde simply gazed back at them, his cheeks growing redder by the moment. Kana cried out, "MMMPH," but the sound was still muffled. Before the two vanished in a burst of orange light, Naruto turned to face the girl on his lap and took hold of her shoulder. Natsu exclaimed, "What the hell? Naruto, teach me that," from the other side of the guild hall. With a bewildered expression, the Dragon Slayer turned to face Gray and Mira. Gray shook his head and asked, "Do you know where they went?" "He has to teleport to a mark, and the only areas I know where he marked are the guild hall, your house, his house, the training clearing, and some random areas around town and in other towns." "So where could he be right now?" Mira flashed away after staring at the location where Naruto and Kana were before the two boys and the rest of the guild conversed. Happy said in Mira's ear, "She likes him," as the Exceed took off. Mira blushed a little and swatted Happy with her hand. Mira questioned, "Who taught you about relationships?" Happy gestured to Natsu. She glared at the Dragon Slayer, who took a few steps back and gulped in terror. "And who taught you?" Naruto," Mira asked, her eyes widening in shock. How could someone nearly a year younger instruct an older person? Natsu remained silent, so Happy spoke up for him in a joyful and enthusiastic manner. Then what did he teach you?" "When a man and woman love each other, they go to bed and they have say." "Stop," Mira shouted at the Exceed, a heavy blush on her face. Happy continued to smile as he dropped onto Natsu's head. "What the hell is Naruto teaching them? Place, training clearing." As the cold seeped through their layers of clothing, the two leaned against a large tree trunk and remained silent. The cold seemed to freshen up Kana's mind. Her drunken stupor seemed to be slowly disappearing. "You like Mira, don't you, Naruto?" Kana said in a drunken tone, her head drooping from side to side. Naruto sighed and leaned his head back until it was comfortably pressed against the wooden bark, saying, "Or not, she's still drunk as hell." Though he disliked the idea, perhaps he could take advantage of her inebriated state. He was still wondering what could be troubling her from nearly a year ago. Kana cocked her head in the direction of the blonde and glared at him, her eyelids drooping. "No, I don't like her," she said. "Lier. You're telling me a Lee," with a drawl. As she went on, Kana leaned in and poked Naruto's forehead after pointing her finger at his face. "You two are almost always together. And then, you always help her, giving here favors and more." "I help her because I can," she asked, "so I help. Besides, I've helped all four of you equally. I just used different ways since your styles are different." Naruto took a moment to think. Naruto went on because it seemed like the silence between them was becoming oppressive. With a hint of pink on his cheeks, the blonde turned away from the brunette and said, "I help you because I want to, not just because I can. So, it's different." The darkness effectively covered it up. Kana pushed Naruto harder as she leaned closer to his side until they were directly next to each other, utterly unaware of his embarrassment and lack of experience with women. "I don't see the difference. Besides, you still haven't answered my first question," she said. "Why did this have to occur the night before his departure?" Naruto sighed. He could not abandon a clone in the guild. It would, of course, spread rapidly. It would last no more than a month. It was strictly forbidden to use a seal to create a clone that could live like a normal human. The Uzumakis knew they could, but they never did so because it created a small paradox. Well, not that small. A person of the same age would die if a living clone of the original person was created, not just any clone, but a living clone that was as powerful and could live as long as the original. Since the world was aware that there were a specific number of people, adding another one at any time would cause another to perish. Normal clones spread quickly, so they are not considered human. These foolish, complex subjects were bothering Naruto, so he swore to himself. Damn it, there are paradoxes everywhere. Kami, why are there so many stupid paradoxes? It's ridiculous. Naruto couldn't help but think, even though he knew he was thinking too much these days, especially with Kana by his side. He had too much on his mind right now. Naruto? The blonde sighed as he snapped out of his reverie. To be honest, he wasn't sure if he truly liked Kana. He might or might not, but the emotions within were dubious. But what the hell am I hesitating for? If I was still in the elemental nations, I wouldn't wait because there was always the possibility I would die the next day. Here, it's not so possible, but there's still a possibility. Hell, I might disappear, and if I do, what happens then? Would she remember me? Or would I just be an ephemeral memory that disappears from her memory when I disappear from this alternate universe? Naruto stayed mum, his thoughts going back in his head. Holding Naruto's face by the sides, Kana made him turn to face her. He snapped out of his reverie and gazed at the unassuming girl with mild surprise. Despite the darkness, Kana's face was clearly red as she looked directly up at him with an inebriated expression. With two raised eyebrows and his cheeks squeezed between Kana's hands, Naruto looked down at her and said, "Talk, you blonde idiot." Naruto said, "I would appreciate it if you wouldn't press so hard, Kana. Even better would be if you would let go of my face," in a tone that was surprisingly clear given how compressed his face was. The brunette repeatedly shook her head, causing her long, wavy hair to whip back and forth. "I don't wanna. Besides." Kana started to stroke the blonde's whiskers with her thumbs. Naruto struggled to suppress his primal urge to purr. The blonde's cheeks quivered as he suppressed the urge to purr, but he was powerless to stop the dust from turning his cheeks pink. "I wanted to touch your whiskers." Naruto whispered, "Kana, what do you want?" His hands went up to remove hers from his face, but she only made his cheeks tighter and tighter when he held her wrists. "You," was her direct response. Naruto's hands released their hold on Kana's wrists as he froze. Kana followed suit, but now she just cupped his cheeks tenderly while continuing to stroke his whiskers with her thumbs. For a few moments, they remained motionless as the two began to feel suffocated by the silence. Naruto stammered, "WH. What?" Kana's face flushed so badly that it seemed to glow in the shadows. She yelled, "It means I like you," with a voice that reverberated throughout the clearing. Then Kana lowered her head and looked around the floor. "I like you, a lot." "Kami, are you screwing with me right now? Why the hell would this happen now?" The blonde could only say, "Kana, I don't," before Kana swiftly raised her head and pushed Naruto's face in her direction. It's true that he could have substituted a log for himself, but what in hell would that accomplish? Playing with the notion of Kana making out with an inanimate object didn't exactly appeal to Naruto. "I hate you right now, Kami. My luck and timing is shit right now." Kana stumbled and turned to the right, resting her head on the blonde's left shoulder just before their lips met. Kana?" There was silence. After a brief moment of stillness, Naruto gave Kana a gentle shake and moved her in front of him. Even though Kana's head was still down, Naruto could see how she was feeling. She was asleep, but her face was still red from inebriation and humiliation, and she was drooling. With a sigh of relief, Naruto thanked Kami and revoked his earlier curse. Kana abruptly said, "It's not fair," but Naruto recognized it as sleep talk. With a sigh, he carefully laid Kana on his back, putting her legs over his arms and her arms over his shoulder to keep her from falling off. He was never a party animal, but he liked the party, so instead of flashing to the guild hall, he chose to walk back, slowly, through the city's streets. That was one thing that had not changed, no matter how much he had changed since arriving in Fury. Since it was nighttime and there were a fair number of people outside, everyone could see Naruto riding piggyback while carrying Kana on his back. Ignoring the glares and shocked expressions, Naruto started talking to himself. Naruto wasn't lying when he said, I don't really know how it really feels to like someone. Although it was a childish crush, he believed he liked Sakura. He didn't really like anyone after that. Even though he preferred to keep his emotions, even during missions, he was forced to train until he became an effective ninja, able to kill and shut off his emotions when necessary. The blonde stopped mumbling as he continued to stroll through the streets, saying, But liking means not just acceptance, but the complete acceptance of a person as a whole. Not just their good qualities, but their idiosyncrasies, their bad parts, their greed, their avarice, their soft nature, everything, even secrets. When Naruto heard the warning signs of a boisterous bar fight a distance away, he raised his head and eyes and said, "Hey, listen to me, talking as if I was an expert at this. Why am I even remotely interested in a relationship?" He wanted to make the building's lights a striking contrast to the night's darkness for the guild. He would be their light if they were ever in the dark. The only thing that had changed from his small circle of precious, trusted people to the entire guild was his resolve from the previous year. Even the entire community, and his new home, would be attacked by Oni, any chakra users, dark mages, or any other type of mage, and they would lose. Naruto could not refer to the guild and the residents of the town as his children because he was not as old as the Sandaime. He couldn't see them from the top because he wasn't master. However, he saw the guild as he saw a blossoming flower, both in terms of age and strength. It required care and outside influences to grow even more robust and beautiful because its roots were deep and strong. He didn't have to be the outside influence. In fact, it might have been a negative force that helped the mages realize that the world was grayscale. When Naruto sensed that Kana was slipping down a little into a position that was uncomfortable for the blonde to carry, he pushed her higher on his back. He caught a glimpse of Kana's dozing face over his shoulder. Her face was literally glowing crimson red as she breathed slowly, her alcoholic breath stealing his scent. She was still very flushed. When he removed the effects of the alcohol and the slightly unkempt hair on the left side of her face, he could see that she was still the naive young woman he had met 2 years prior, and he would rather that it remained that way for her and everyone else. Because he had fought in one of the most destructive wars in the elemental nation's history, he had concealed his pain from his eyes. A ninja had to understand deceit. Abruptly, Naruto leapt into the air, landing on the side of the guild building next to a window while carefully holding Kana against his back. He hurriedly opened it, leapt into the infirmary, and went straight to the bed, setting Kana down on it. Naruto asked himself, attempting to recall, haven't I done this before? But he was unable to for some reason. The loud noise downstairs was most likely the cause. He disliked parties, Kami. The Fairy Tail Guild Hall is the location. Natsu questioned, are you sure? Are you really sure? Before answering Natsu's question once more, Mira closed her eyes and let out a tense sigh. I don't even know why I've put up with you so far, and responded civilly instead of kicking your ass. Yes, Naruto is more like the caring little brother I don't have. I don't like him like that. Natsu suddenly produced an inspector's glasses, put them on his eyes, and stared at Mira, circling the girl several times before humming to himself. The glasses of inspection states that, you are lying. Naruto remarked, Natsu, you sound like an idiot, from the door to the second floor stairs leading to the infirmary. Mira, who was on the verge of losing her temper, inhaled deeply before turning to glare at Naruto. He was the one causing him all of this trouble at the moment. Naruto approached the group and grinned at Mira while giggling to himself at her anger toward him. Natsu pointed at Mira and leapt excitedly in front of the blonde. It's true. Methinks she likes you, the Dragonslayer's head said in a salute, echoing Natsu's assertion. In response, Naruto sighed and turned to face Mira, who was inexplicably wearing a big sweat drop, a deadpan expression, and a heavy glare that surrounded the girl with a sense of death. Naruto blurted out, I don't like her, without sounding irritated or upset. Mira flinched uncontrollably. It wasn't because she didn't like him or wasn't expecting that. Rather, it was surprising how open and honest he was about his feelings. Natsu grinned before putting his arm around Naruto's neck and dragging him toward the center of the guild, where a new bar fight had just broken out. She's more like an older sister, an extremely conceited and uncaring older sister. But then again, this whole family called Fairy Tail has their quirks. While Gray was somewhere else in the guild, fighting Urza and getting kicked in the ass, Mira watched the two boys leave. After giving it some thought, Naruto said, so, that makes me your older brother, right? Knowing that Naruto was kidding, Natsu accepted the insult and said, a very stupid older brother, yes. Naruto answered without missing a beat, oh yay, then how'd I act smart, then? The two turned to face one another and exchanged a cheeky smile before Naruto leapt away from Natsu's flaming fist. Simple. Don't be stupid. With a mock, exasperated roll of his eyes, Naruto gestured to Natsu from across the guild. Oh boy. The flaming idiot is insulted. Ready for round 738. Natsu grinned broadly as he glared at Naruto, who was smirking back at him calmly. Bring it on. Naturally, another altercation broke out in the bar. Because Naruto destroyed Gildart's fourth casket of beer, He had little time to enjoy it before an extremely agitated and inebriated S-class mage joined the battle. Good times, good times. Situated. Magnolia Town's boundaries, play, the reason I was born. It was the dead of night. Everyone in the guild was either unconscious or extremely inebriated after the party ended almost an hour ago. Before returning home, Naruto had made sure to complete 2 tasks. In case the man's mission went awry, he first created a Hiraishin seal on guild arts. Second, in order for Naruto to examine it later for future use, he copied every detail of the S-class missions from the 2nd floor onto the board. As the night wore on, Naruto sat motionless, his face cast in shadow by the darkness. Standing atop a tree, he had a perfect view of the town in total darkness because of his height. There were a few stray lights on throughout the town, but almost everyone had gone to sleep. The blonde continued to stare at the town he had grown to love with serious blue eyes. He loved the town and its residents, even if it wasn't as much as he loved Konoha. He had created new, valuable relationships and adjusted his objectives to fit the new reality. Naruto was more than happy to handle the repercussions of his arrival, even though he was aware of them. He was a ninja, after all. He would start his reconnaissance missions tomorrow. He desperately needed information, which he lacked in terrible quantities. If there was one thing the old pervert had taught him in life, aside from ninja skills, that would be absolutely helpful to anyone on the planet, it was that people needed information. For the previously mentioned reason, information, something that could either save or kill a person, was required. Even though they could disseminate the information, a person with information was deadly. Fortunately, there was a counter to an information. Rich person. Don't reveal everything, as Naruto had done. He clearly knew far more than he told them, Master. His S-class status totally concealed the blonde's actual strength. He knew that there were people in the world who might force him to use all of his strength right now, but he would keep it hidden until the time was right. And for a few more years, perhaps. But until then, he would do his best to conceal it. He was a ninja, after all. Before the blonde could embark on a mission that would allow him to leave Fairy Tail for months or even years at a time, he had to fulfill a number of requirements. He had to start by strengthening himself, which he was doing every day through training. His second task was to transform his team into S-class mages so they wouldn't be dependent on him for everything. If they did, they wouldn't develop into unique individuals. They wouldn't reach their full potential. And perhaps Makarov would let Naruto go on his own quest by then, once they had transformed into the mage they desired to be. Naturally, the blonde would lie to Makarov, something he could do with ease, and not reveal the true reason for his desire to embark on a protracted mission. He was a ninja, after all, and the secret was deceit. Yes, a lot of things about the blonde changed, including goals, dreams, ideas, attitudes, and friends, but one thing would never change. There were a lot of things, but at the moment, Naruto's main thought was that he would always be a ninja. Not a sorcerer. 2 terms that are similar but entirely different. Both of them engaged in combat, but one fought head on while the other fought in the shadows. One fought for protection, the other to kill. Indeed, Naruto fought to defend, and he thought that a person would become truly powerful if they had something extremely valuable to defend. However, he also realized that in order to achieve true peace and mutual understanding, killing was necessary. It had been a long time since his days of the elemental nations, and although it was much better, it wasn't perfect, and it appeared that the day of true peace would be far off, not just yet. However, he remained committed to his dream, Arrow, Sennin's dream. That eventually, harmony rather than conflict would govern the country. That everyone would comprehend one another. Naruto didn't focus on the physical features in front of him as he turned away from the town to face the vast area of land and mountains. Instead, it was to confront the entire world. There was a barrier to his dream somewhere. That goal required a lot of steps, but when had the blonde ever given up on something he really wanted? When the blonde was standing in front of death's door, Madara was powerless to stop him. He would smash through every obstacle that stood between him and his dream. Then perhaps, just possibly, Naruto would be able to sleep at last. To put an end to all of the pointless fighting. To put a definitive end to everything. But the blonde would wait patiently until then. He was a ninja, after all. Ninjas also required patience. In actuality, the results were gradual rather than instantaneous. Naruto faced the town once more before lifting his head to the heavens. The place where he had stepped out of the past and into the future was somewhere up there. However, time was a relative concept. The present and the future were now. And it would be history to someone else in the future. Raising his hand above his head, Naruto concentrated a tiny bit of energy above his palm. Red and blue energies converged to form a tiny ball of absurd mass and power as positive and negative matter gradually emerged in tiny droplets. Then the water and wind came together, first as a drift and a trickle, and then gradually increased in size, but only enough to cause a minor disturbance. He started adding fire, and the flames grew hot and wild as they joined the wind. But as he added a fourth element, his lightning affinity, the method abruptly stopped working. A hand fell to Naruto's side, but kept his gaze fixed on the moon, his golden eyes returning to their typical ocean blue hue. His thoughts vanished from his mind, leaving it empty and empty. He had time, but it might take a few more years to get it perfected and ready for battle. Time for planning, preparation, and training. It's time to learn. It's time to get stronger and comprehend his current predicament. When it came to the fake chakra users of this era, time was not on his side. He would be patient, though. And he would make the most of it and more when the time came to attack. He was, after all, a ninja. X784 year, Harjin Port. I think this is it. Natsu! Exclaimed Happy. Natsu, with an epic stomachache, responded with a groan from his place on the train. He was hunched over in his chair, attempting to settle in, but it was a very tough task. It's crucial to understand that a Dragon Slayer will become more uncomfortable with any movement the stronger he is. Currently an S-class mage, Natsu was suffering from severe motion sickness. I don't think I can make it. Natsu groaned in suffering as the train abruptly came to a halt. Before continuing, the Dragon Slayer thudded on the car floor after falling off the seat. It's finally over, the torture. In an attempt to get Natsu's attention, Happy leapt to the ground and began tugging on his sleeve. In sharp contrast to his previous state, Natsu stood up abruptly, but his face was pale with fixed lines of exertion. Let's go, Natsu. We don't want to miss our stop. You don't want me to use the medicine Naruto made for you, do you? He asked. He barely managed to get out of the train before it left the station after forcing himself to walk to the car's exit and down the alleyways. Natsu shuddered and said, Never again. I can't understand how Naruto can cook so well but give me crap for medicine. Natsu's motion sickness was effectively treated by the blonde's medication, but it tasted like the most repulsive thing he had ever tasted in his life. The fact that the medication was the most repulsive thing Natsu had ever tasted said a lot, especially since he always grabbed whatever he thought was food and consumed it. Natsu sat on it and said, But he makes really good food. With a big smile on his face, as he made his first foray into the town, climbing the stairs from the station to the streets, Natsu wholeheartedly agreed with that statement. It was a generic town, with cobblestone floors and buildings constructed from a variety of materials, including metal, wood, nails, and other specialized materials. As he strolled through the town, Natsu couldn't help but smile as he took in the scenery and the atmosphere, particularly the vast ocean and its gentle waves crashing against the beach and port. Natsu heard feminine screaming, and his ears twitched, but not out of fear. He blanched instantly, then sighed, pinched his nose, and closed his eyes. But he had to do it. The place where he was screaming most likely had a sizable crowd, so his best chance of learning anything was right now at the place where the damned fangirls were. With another sigh, Natsu nodded his head and asked, Are you going to go there, Natsu? Yeah, but I really wish I didn't. Natsu's upbeat demeanor gained him popularity in the Sorcerer's magazine as soon as he was promoted to S-class mage. He was also attractive to most of the women, which helped, and his pink hair somehow made him even more attractive. As a result, fangirls became the bane of Naruto's, and now Gray's and Natsu's, lives. Until he realized how insane the fangirls really were, Natsu was fine with it at first, enjoying the attention and taking pride in his ascent to S-class. It was really traumatic for the Dragon Slayer to learn where he lived and to see posters and signs of his face all around his home. When Natsu made it into the top 10 list of mages that women would want as boyfriends, it only got worse. In fact, he started to regret his previous practical joke against Naruto. The Dragon Slayer with the fiery hair let out another sigh and accelerated his pace, eager to finish what was about to happen. Before he even noticed the sizable crowd, he heard the sounds of fangirlism and ebullient, excited chattering during a few minutes of walking, but one thing remained constant. Natsu's eyes darted. It's Salamander. He paused abruptly, pondering for a moment while his gaze strayed to the sky and his finger pressed against his chin. Do they mean Igneel? I hope so. The pink-haired Dragon Slayer's eyes brightened with hope as he accelerated once more to get to the center of the cries. He objected when he saw the sizable group, which was mostly made up of girls. That's a lot of girls. I believe that in order to avoid being noticed, I will employ transformation magic. But now that he's a dragon, I know it's not Igneel, so who the hell is this salamander? Natsu quickly changed his appearance and attire, becoming an unremarkable individual. Transforming his eyes into coal-colored eyes and his spiky pink hair into black. Instead of wearing the typical Natsu attire and sandals, He changed into something Naruto would wear. A long black coat, long black jeans for pants, and light blue shoes for sandals. After completing his metamorphosis, he pushed his way through the girls' throng, ignoring the snide comments and cries until he got to the front. He fell to his knees when he was abruptly shoved and found himself directly in front of the salamander. When Natsu saw who the girls were referring to as salamander, his hopeful smile instantly disappeared. Igneel wasn't that guy, of course, but who the devil was he? Only his neck was tied in a sort of black cape worn by the spiky, blonde-haired man. Natsu didn't care that he was wearing a white-collared shirt underneath the cape, which gave him an air of formality. Natsu looked directly into the man's eyes and asked, "Who the hell are you?" The man with blonde hair instantly picked up his flare, grinned, and gestured to himself. "You may know me as Salaman. Hey, where are you going?" The man didn't even finish when he noticed that, in sharp contrast to the women who were grinning at him with hearts in their eyes, the changed Natsu was already slowly making his way away from the crowds while carrying a cat on his shoulder in a melancholy position. "Hey, you're so rude to Salamander, he's a great mage. Apologize to him." Unceremoniously, a few of the girls near the periphery of the crowd grabbed hold of his scarf or the edges of his clothes and dragged him back to the center of the crowd. Salamander calmly said, "It's all right, girls." He didn't mean it, while giving the girls a flamboyant wink. The girls screamed and swooned as they took it all in. Natsu was calmly and lamely staring up at the man from the floor when he took out a whiteboard and marker, quickly wrote something on it, and handed it to her. With a weary tone, Natsu questioned, "What now?" Ignoring it, the man handed Natsu the whiteboard and his signature. He ended with a quiet undertone of arrogance. "Here, I'll give my signature to you. Show it off to your friends," he said. Once more, the girls gushed about how envious they were of the Dragonslayer who was getting signed by the renowned Salamander. But rather than welcoming it with joy and excitement, Natsu merely knelt down and uttered the words. Natsu abruptly found himself thrown out of the circle and skidding against the town street, saying, "I don't want it." But the disappointment he felt building in his stomach was more painful than the skidding pain on his neck and stomach because he had been waiting so long to see his dad. He muttered to himself, "It wasn't him," before stumbling back up and turning around. He saw the mage mention a party at the port, then snap his fingers and take off on a flaming cloud, leaving with many of the girls vowing to attend. With disgust, Natsu clicked his tongue. "That is some of the ugliest and worst made fires I have ever seen." Natsu said softly, "What is he?" as he looked up at the last spot he saw of the man before he vanished from view. "He is really disgusting." When Natsu turned around, he saw a blonde girl with a ponytail on the side of her head who was incredibly attractive. She had enormous breasts and was very curvaceous. His clothing emphasized this rather than concealed it. Natsu disregarded the fact that her shorts were too high on her thighs. The girl grinned at him and said, Natsu arched his brows and said, "Thanks for earlier." Happy simply gazed up at the girl, his expression inquisitive. "Where?" Harjin Port Restaurant, as he continued to eat without inhibition, chewing and glugging on his food. Natsu uttered the words, "Blah blah uzurl blah." "You're a nice person." Happy was doing the same, although he was griping about the fish's poor quality. Lucy said, "Haha, it's okay, but can you please not eat like that?" But he didn't respond or behave differently. Lucy assumed Natsu was just a talking cat, but he abruptly stopped grabbing food and swallowed before speaking to his devoted Exceed partner. The cat's ability to speak had initially taken her by surprise, but this was a magical world, anything could happen. Natsu grabbed a big piece of chicken, bit out a big chunk, and started chewing enthusiastically. "You know the fish will never be as good as his, Happy. Restaurants just don't make it the way you want," he said. At least he liked the taste. When Natsu looked down, she saw Happy eating his fish while feigning to be a dinosaur. More precisely, a T-Rex. The Exceed pretended that his arms were too small to grasp the food as he smashed his head against the fish. Natsu laughed so hard that he spat out the food in his mouth right away, and it came directly to Lucy. The blonde exclaimed, using a napkin to wipe the food and dirt from her face and clothes. Even though Natsu and his partner had already put a hole in the blonde's pocketbook, she managed to maintain a smile as she spoke. "That salamander guy was using a magic called Charm, a magic that was banned several years ago because it causes other people's hearts to be attracted to the caster," Lucy said with disdain. Her eyebrows furrowed in growing disgust as she gazed out the window at the streets. The girl turned back to the two, her tense face suddenly taking on a smile. "But trying to get girls with magic, especially banned magic, how disgusting. But because you two jumped in, the magic wore off on me." With his mouth full, Natsu uttered, I see, without really listening. Right now, the food was the most important thing. Put food in his stomach and speak later. Natsu didn't appear to be listening, but Lucy ignored this and went on. Natsu simply listened in silence as he ate his substantial meal, now downing a drink before slamming the cup down on the table and requesting more. I may not look like this, but I'm a mage, too. I'm looking at guilds and want to be part of one. I'll get to take missions, and I heard there are some really strong guilds out there, especially the one I want to join. That's cool, said Natsu, who was only halfway through the plates that covered the table before beginning his meal again while he waited for his drink to arrive. When Natsu had ordered so much food, Lucy had looked at him incredulously, but she was surprised to see that he could actually eat it without any issues. Furthermore, it was frightening how quickly the Dragonslayer consumed food. Lucy tried to strike up a conversation with the black-haired stranger who had assisted her by asking, "So, why are you here?" Natsu grinned broadly as she looked up. "I was looking for Ignil." "Who's Ignil?" Lucy inquired, appreciating that he had at last answered or initiated a conversation. "He's my dad," Natsu said right away. Even on his current terms, it was a little dumb to say that his father was a dragon. Before leaving, Naruto made the rather uninteresting Dragonslayer think more rationally. He always came back, but the blonde S-class mage left the guild 2 years ago and hadn't returned since he saved guild arts during the man's SS-class mission. Out of courtesy, Lucy said, "Ah, well, I hope you find him. What's your name?" "Natsu," he answered, keeping his last name a secret to avoid attracting potential fangirls. Those things were all over the place. Cammy. For Cammy's sake, they were worse than the media. He was unable to get rid of them in any way. After setting some cash on the table, Lucy said, "Well, thanks for saving me, Natsu. I'll be leaving. Bye." And then she stood up and left. At that moment, Natsu and Happy rose from their chairs and began to bow on the restaurant floor. "Thank you. We are not worthy." "Thank you," Lucy yelled, embarrassed. "Stop that," before bolting from the building. As soon as the blonde departed, Natsu and Happy stopped bowing, exchanged a look, and burst out laughing. They could stare all they wanted, but they couldn't ruin a good time, so they didn't care if the customers were looking at them. Place. Somewhere in Harjin town. Lucy looked up at the sky and lifted her hand to block the tiny glare that was flickering into her eyes. Haha, these guys are too much, man. I really want to be in Fairy Tail now. It just seems so great, and free. Yeah, being a Fairy Tail mage would be the best, huh? And they have some pretty amazing people, too. Lucy instantly went on guard, shutting her magazine and quickly turning around to find out who had snuck up on her. "I see. So you wish to be part of Fairy Tail?" she asked. Glaring at the man, she asked, "What do you want?" As soon as she saw Salamander, he simply raised his hands in a peaceful gesture in return before continuing. He raised one eyebrow provocatively and said, "I just wanted someone beautiful like you to be at the party. It would be a shame if you didn't come." When Lucy answered, she suppressed her disgust. If anything, Lucy's words seemed to make the salamander smile even more. "Don't think you can fool me. I know you used charm magic on all those girls. The problem with that magic is knowledge, and since I know that you used it, it won't work on me." "Perfect. I knew you were a mage the moment I saw you. That's perfect." "How is it perfect that I know that you were using a banned magic on the girls back at the town area?" she inquired. Salamander grinned once more, his smile growing even more pronounced. "Because I'm a part of Fairy Tail." Lucy's eyes grew wide with astonishment. This man belonged to one of Fiore's most powerful guilds, Fairy Tail, which is known for causing chaos and destruction all the time. To make sure she understood, she inquired, "You're a part of Fairy Tail?" Lucy didn't even need to think to answer, "That's right. I'm the salamander of Fairy Tail. So, if you come to the party and keep the magic thing our little secret, I'll put a good word in for you with the master so that you can get in." Before vanishing on his flame cloud, the blonde man grinned and snapped his fingers, saying, "Of course. I'll be waiting then." After watching him fly away for a moment, Lucy pondered. "It's just to get into Fairy Tail. I'll deal with that idiot to get in." Her face brightened. Fairy Tail. I'm going to finally be a part of Fairy Tail. Time skip. 2 hours, as he patted his stomach, Natsu exclaimed, "Man, I'm full." That meal was good. Now he and Happy were strolling through the streets, enjoying the twilight of the afternoon. The viewer was unable to adequately describe the beauty created by the sun's orange light reflecting off the water's surface as it moved slowly in a lazy arc across the ocean. Flames appeared to be dancing on the water's surface, never remaining motionless for even a single second. Happy exclaimed, simultaneously patting his stomach. Until the final train arrived to return them to Magnolia Town, the two made the decision to stroll around the town. Natsu wanted to postpone the agony of riding a train for as long as possible, which was partly due to the desire to enjoy the remainder of the day and simply unwind. The two wandered aimlessly through the streets for almost 30 minutes, heading for whatever seemed to have the most appeal or attraction. Eventually, the two became disinterested and began to return to the train station until they overheard two girls chatting about the party the salamander was throwing. With an overly enthusiastic tone, one of the girls asked, "Did you hear? The great mage salamander is hosting a party on one of his boats at the port." "Really?" In response to the abrupt scream, Natsu and Happy both covered their ears with their hands before gradually releasing them and grimacing slightly in agony due to their enhanced senses. Then, in an attempt to escape the two adamant girls, the two started walking once more, albeit a little more quickly. "Wow, I wish I could have gone." The first girl said regretfully, "Yeah, me too," and then she perked up once more. "Oh yeah. I even heard he's a part of that famous guild called Fairy Tail." "Give up." It was barely audible to Natsu, but he heard it. "What? He said he's a part of my guild?" Happy was looking up at Natsu with a serious expression on his face. Then the two gave each other a joint nod, then looked out at the port's boats. "Happy, pass me the disgusting medicine. We have a party to crash." Place. Boat. Lucy's initial reaction to the party was that the person who organized it truly didn't hold back. Tablecloths were provided, along with an abundance of fine wine, food, and refreshments, as well as entertainment. To set the tone for the celebration, some people were playing a variety of calming and entertaining music by the side of the boat. Additionally, the party had an air of elegance because everyone there was dressed in formal attire. However, because of their familial status, Lucy was accustomed to these kinds of situations, but nobody needed to know that. In any case, she had a good time for the first 30 minutes of the party, but she was far more excited about the prospect of joining Fairy Tail than she was about the party itself. At the moment, she was sitting on a couch in one of the ship's rooms, chatting with Salamander. When he said, "So your name is Lucy, huh? Such a pretty name," he was flirting. The attractive blonde accepted it with a smile and a thank you. "Thank you," she said, tilting her head cutely. After giving a nod, the man with the blonde hair raised his right hand, holding a glass of wine on the stem with 2 fingers. Lucy raised an eyebrow, but she wasn't entirely unfamiliar with the concept of drinking. "You're welcome. So, how about we start this evening together with a glass?" she said. She had previously consumed wine, but it wasn't as tasty or compulsive as she had anticipated. In addition, sweets were far superior. Salamander simply shook his head and closed his eyes, as though he were addressing a child. "Don't you have to attend to your other guests?" he asked. "I just felt like I wanted to have a drink with you, someone that is so pretty." "Here," he said, snapping his fingers. In the wine glass, a few droplets rose into the air. Lucy observed with a hint of fascination. Then it began to slowly make its way to her face. Lucy screamed in frustration inside her head, "Try opening your mouth. They'll come in one by one." All she wanted was to be a part of Fairy Tail at last. When would this moron allow her to become a member of the guild? However, she gave in, slightly opening her mouth. "Just a little longer. If I deal with this guy a little longer, I can finally be a part of Fairy Tail." "Come on, Lucy, you waited for so long. Just a few hours couldn't hurt, right?" But just as the droplets were about to reach her mouth, she abruptly pushed back against the couch and swung her hand in front of her. Then she got to her feet and gave the man in front of her a fierce look. She said angrily, "This is a sleeping drug, isn't it? What are you planning?" Salamander simply grinned at her, instantly transforming his smile into a dark, repulsive grin. He teasingly said, "Oh, and how did you know?" Ignoring the tone, Lucy glared more intensely. She attempted to set her own terms, saying, "Don't get me wrong. I want to join Fairy Tail. But I have absolutely no intention at all of becoming your girl. Are we clear?" Lucy was aware of what would have happened if she had dozed off. Later on, she would have woken up, possibly in a room and bed she was unfamiliar with. Salamander leaned forward, his savage smile growing even wider. His face became shadowed, and for some reason, the room's lights seemed to grow darker as he did. He concluded, leaving the girl perplexed, "You've been a bad girl, Lucy. If you had fallen asleep peacefully, everything would have gone smoothly. But since you've been bad, you need to be punished." "What are you talking ab?" "Ah!" she exclaimed as 2 strong hands suddenly seized her arms, immobilizing her. When she turned to look behind her, she saw that the curtain had been pulled aside, exposing several big men with hideous smirks on their faces. "Nice job, Salamander.san. This one's real pretty," exclaimed the man holding her left arm. The other burly man to her right said, "We haven't had one that was so pretty in a while," in a tone that made the blonde shudder. She didn't like the direction this was taking, and it was moving quickly in that direction. Lucy turned to face Salamander and gave him a fierce glare. She screamed at him, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Since she couldn't comprehend why they were putting her in this situation. Prior to his reply, Salamander approached her and took one hand to her cheeks, then leaned in until their faces were just a few inches apart. The word, slave, made Lucy gasp, but the word, Bosco, made her heart race. "Welcome to our slave ship. I must ask that you remain silent until we reach Bosco." "Wait, why Bosco? What happened to Fairy Tale?" she exclaimed in a terrified voice. Her dreams were dashed by the next words, plunging her into the abyss of impossibility and despair. In a frantic tone, Salamander said, "I told you, this is a slave ship, not a ship to Fairy Tale. You were never meant to join Fairy Tale in the first place." His voice grew more vicious by the word, and he began to laugh as he spoke. He stopped laughing and cackling abruptly, but the smirk remained on his face as he leaned in again. "I brought you in as merchandise, a tool for men, for pleasure, ha ha ha," he said. "Just give up, little lady." Lucy's only option was to give the man a blank look in return. She had been totally tricked. She would be spending her days with men. Never the same man for more than a day. Instead of living in a guild for the next few years. The pit of her stomach began to grow as she felt disgust at the man in front of her and anger at herself. The prospect of becoming a member of the guild she had always desired had made her oblivious to the man's malevolence. "You thought this out well, Salamander.san," the man behind her remarked. "When girls fall for your charm, they all fawn over to you and become perfect merchandise. Such an easy job." It was obvious what he meant when he said, "But it seems that the charm one doesn't work on this little lady here. So, should we train her a little?" Lucy's head continued to descend as the men behind her talked about what they would do to her body in order to train her. She couldn't be living like this, could she? She was eating with a stranger named Natsu only a few hours ago. I wish that he was the Natsu Dragneel from Fairy Tale. If she couldn't do anything now or look forward to her future, she could at least wish for something from her past. Her arms were currently in the iron grip of her possessors, making it impossible for her to get her keys. She had never felt so worthless in her life. Pain. Sadness. Loneliness. Not useless, though. In this case, there was nothing she could do. Why would someone do this? How can they do something like this? Before his eyes brightened at the sound of keys jingling, Salamander drew nearer, patting her and reaching into the slit in her skimpy dress. He was a little taken aback by what he discovered when he pulled it out, but he still grinned. She was a true mage. The blonde slaver mostly said to himself, "The keys of the gates, so you're a stellar spirit mage, hum?" He was heard with interest by the men behind Lucy and clinging to her. One of them said, "Wait, what's a stellar spirit? We have no idea what magic is." They were wasting time, and Salamander simply shook his head. All of the women on the boat ought to have been subdued and prepared for the slave trade by now. "Don't worry about it. Only contracted mages can use this," he said, twirling the ring and jingling the keys in the air before hurling them out of the window. There was a splash, signifying that the keys fell into the empty abyss of the ocean. Lucy felt the same as her keys, her heart and hopes absolutely sinking into despair. There was really nothing she could do at this point. Her celestial keys were the only true magic she possessed, and she lacked any physical strength. Her despair echoed in her chest, and tears welled up around her eyes. She was preoccupied with her thoughts when she heard Salamander mention that she was going to be branded as a slave. "So, this is a mage of Fairy Tale, the guild I've been dreaming for so long to join." All she wanted was to be by herself, but she doubted she would ever experience that again. Her future would be to be with men, coerced into doing so for financial gain, for the rest of her life, until she died or became worthless. Hope would most likely never happen to her again. Bastards. The room's top abruptly collapsed inward, sending metal fragments and wooden planks crashing to the floor. Lucy instantly recognized the person who fell to the ground. "Natsu!" she exclaimed, wiping away her tears. In shock, the men who had been holding her arms had released them. Even Salamander had retreated, gazing at the intruder. Perhaps she might have hope. Was he even a mage, though? Given that he was outnumbered by strong men and mages, what could he do? "The brat from earlier!" Salamander exclaimed, startled, gesturing to Natsu as she slowly rose from the ground after colliding with it. Glancing at the men before him, he lifted his fist from the cracked floor. He was no fool. A glance at the room and his surroundings told him everything that was going on in a second. Furthermore, using his enhanced hearing, he heard the word, slave, just before he crashed through the roof. When he witnessed the girl he had met being enslaved by the men in front of him, that was more than enough to make him furious. Natsu had no trouble figuring out what was going on in this scenario. Happy, the Dragon Slayer declared authoritatively. The Exceed gave the still transformed S-Class mage a salute before bringing out his wings with a brief magical outburst. Abruptly, Happy began to move, and in an instant, she and Lucy were in the air. Lucy said, "Huh?" However, she sensed it. In the same way that she was being physically raised off the ground, her hope was also rising. She would get away. Now, all of the girls might be set free if she could somehow find her keys in the ocean instead. Salamander quickly regained his bearings. It was unexpected to see someone smash through the roof, but it was even more astounding to see a talking cat with wings. He aimed a huge flame at the flying pair, but it narrowly missed. He turned to his subordinates after gritting his teeth in frustration. "Don't let that woman escape. If she tells the Rune Knights or the council members about this, it will be a problem for us," Salamander said firmly. Natsu crossed his arms over his chest and stared at the men without making any attempt to stop them. Even with their projectiles, he had faith that Happy could handle these guys with ease. Happy exclaimed, "Oh, look! It's a gun!" as his eyes darted downward from the sky. Lucy heard a bullet whizzing through her ear and instantly shrieked as she looked down. Happy appeared completely unfazed by this perilous circumstance. He appeared to smirk rather than smile, if anything. "Shall we dance, Lucy?" The Exceed abruptly started to descend in the direction of the ocean, rapidly spinning and twisting through the air to avoid the men's bullets. He had learned how to avoid projectiles from training with Naruto and Kana. When he asked Naruto to train him, the blonde responded by throwing a dozen blunted weapons at the Exceed because he didn't want to be a burden to Natsu and wanted to be on an S-Class mission. Happy's training began at that point. Lucy pointed to the side of the boat and said, "Wait, Happy. Can you drop me in the ocean right about there?" With a swift nod, the feline Exceed took off for the area, continuing to spin and twirl while dodging several bullets. The flips and spins made Lucy nauseous, but she would persevere. If she wanted to save the girls, she had to. They relied on her. Natsu uttered the words, "You all sicken me to the stomach," with rage. The slavers turned to face the Dragon Slayer, who was still in the room, and pointed their guns at him as soon as they remembered him. Natsu did not even bat an eye. Natsu abruptly slammed his fist and open palm together in front of his chest. "Slaving people, drugging them, and even branding them. You're lucky I'm not him, or all of you would have been screwed within a second. I'm still sending you to the Rune Knights, but you're not going there without a few injuries." Salamander cheed in frustration and gestured to Natsu, whose face was now entirely serious and tarnished with rage. He commanded, "Kill him. Shoot at him." The men fired at him simultaneously, but Natsu didn't even bat an eyelash. He just turned and flipped out of range. So predictable where they're aiming. Click 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 click. As he hit the ground, Natsu grinned, and they're out of bullets. Situated outside the boat. "Huh." Lucy exhaled deeply to fill her nearly empty lungs before lifting her hands. Happy lowered himself until he was nearly on the water's surface and said, "Are you all right, Lucy?" Then he landed on her head and his wings vanished. Lucy grinned. She swiftly searched through the keys in her raised hand and located the one she was specifically looking for, saying, "Yup, I'm fine." Open, a door to the treasure vase palace. Aquarius. A mermaid. Like woman holding a big vase materialized out of nowhere. She had somewhat long hair and was dressed in a bikini. Although she had several pieces of jewelry on her body, the one on her forehead that held her hair up and gave her an Egyptian appearance was the most noticeable. "Whoa!" exclaimed Happy, startled. Lucy grinned. "Now, Aquarius, use your powers to send the boat back to the port," the blonde said, turning to Aquarius. "I'm a stellar spirit mage, so I can summon beings from other worlds." The summoned being pretended not to hear for a few seconds before answering. "TCH. A tick mark appeared on Lucy's forehead. "Did you just TCH me?" "Huh?" Lucy exclaimed, momentarily losing sight of her predicament. Aquarius turned away from Lucy and gazed at the boat for a moment before saying, "You're such a noisy brat." He then spoke again in a serious tone. "Let me tell you one thing. Don't ever drop the keys again, I'll kill you," the spirit warned. "Hi," Lucy said, terrified by Aquarius' annoyance and rage. The ghost gave a brief nod before. "ORRAAA," she exclaimed, swinging her vase like a baseball bat. The boat, Lucy, and Happy were caught in the wash of a massive wave that abruptly arose from the ocean. Lucy yelled angrily, "Damn it, I didn't mean send me on the wave." Happy exclaimed with glee, "Wow, I get to ride on a tsunami. This was utterly arbitrary. If Lucy hadn't been riding a huge wave right now, she would have sweat dropped and deadpanned at the exceed. Lucy dismissed Aquarius as soon as the boat and the two crashed onto the port, though she was a little annoyed that the water spirit was flaunting her boyfriend. Then, disregarding the outbursts from the onlookers on the port, the two hurried to the boat, ran up the stairs, and entered the room where they were certain that Natsu and the Slavers would soon engage in combat. Lucy and Happy opened the doors and saw Natsu slowly rising, his face displaying some signs of uneasiness. You can't do anything to me. I'm in a legal guild, Fairy Tail. If you harm me, you'll just be punished by the Rune Knights. Besides, brat, it's common courtesy to not get onto other people's boats without permission. The big wave would have overpowered the medication Naruto had made for the Dragon Slayer, and the Exceed instantly linked it to motion sickness. But he should be alright now that the ship's rocking had stopped. Ah. Right, there was that. Look at me in the eyes, Mage of Fairy Tail. Natsu said gravely, his voice devoid of any hint of discomfort. Ignoring the men charging at him from the front, the Dragon Slayer fixed his intense gaze on Salamander. Lucy started to call forth a spirit, but Happy intervened. His voice was proud as he said, "Don't worry. Natsu is a mage, an extremely strong mage." Startled, she questioned, "Natsu's a mage? A strong one?" Happy nodded his head with a sly smile, his eyes gleaming as though he had a secret that the blonde girl did not. Abruptly, Natsu vanished into a smoke cloud. Surprised, the two men who were charging at him froze in their tracks. Taking advantage of the situation, Natsu put a vice-like grip on one man's head and slammed it into the head of the other charging man. Both fell unconscious to the ground. All that remained after the smoke cleared was Natsu in his former form, his face displaying obvious rage. Accusingly, "I've never seen you before," exclaimed Natsu. Behind Salamander, two of the men took a sharp breath and instantly recognized Natsu. Lucy recognized the scarf and the rosy-colored hair, too. Any girls who were interested in magic or mages were totally missing the point. They both exclaimed, "Bora-san. I recognize him," in shock. Bora looked back at the Slavers. "What the hell? Don't say my name now," he exclaimed, scolding them for their foolish error. There was no easy way for them to escape if they were caught now. Lucy nodded slowly, still recovering from the shock of dining with the Natsu Dragneel, the Flame King of Fairy Tail, a member of the elite generation. Bora of prominence. He was banished from a mage guild called Titan Nose a few years ago. As his magic levels started to rise, Natsu exclaimed, "I don't care if you're good or bad. You used our name, and I can't forgive you for that." However, Bora appeared to regain his senses and launched a powerful burst of fire at Natsu, engulfing the Dragon Slayer in flames. Bora grinned and assumed it was over. The others didn't agree. There was a reason why Natsu was called the Flame King, so Lucy was concerned, but not nearly as much as she would have been for anyone else. In fact, she was more concerned about Bora and his enslavers than anyone else. Disgusting. Is this really fire? It's worse than Naruto's medicine. Even Naruto made better fire than this when he first started learning it as a new magic, Natsu was saying while surrounded by flames. The flames appeared to move slowly around the Dragon Slayer before fading away and flowing into his mouth. "Whatever, I'll eat whatever I can get." "What the hell? Is he eating fire?" Everyone shouted in surprise except for Happy, whose smile was widening until it was similar to a Cheshire grin. "Ha, itadakimasu, but that still sucked," Natsu said with a tone of disgust in his voice. The awful fire had left a bad aftertaste in his mouth. It even had a foul odor. As he took a deep breath, Natsu's magical energy increased and his expression returned to one of serious concentration. "Let me show you real fire. Fire dragons." Some of the men behind Bora were attempting to flee from the pink-haired mage, while others were stuttering in terror. There was no way they could escape Natsu's well-planned attack, anyway. Flames of red and blue began to flicker around Natsu's mouth, licking the air as it swirled and grew in mass until it burst forward with crimson and red explosive velocity. Roar! Cutting through the water and creating a semicircular area where the water was cut out, the blast shot forward, plowing through the boat and all of the men, even passing the port and the ocean. After completing his assault, Natsu leapt forward on the balls of his feet and charged directly at Bora, his fists blazing. Salamander's iron fist. The blow struck the blonde man's solar plexus with such force that it knocked him out of breath and sent him hurtling through the ceiling, taking metal and wood fragments with him. Lucy continued to stare in disbelief. Here was one of the elites of Fairy Tail. She had eaten and met Natsu Dragneel. Her day could only have been better if... Nastu yelled at Happy, "Come on, we're getting out of here." As he grabbed Lucy's hand and hurried off the ship, The trio fled for the streets as soon as they were released from the ship. As they watched the Rune Knights approach the scene of devastation, Happy was in the air and Natsu was dragging Lucy along. Although the Rune Knights had also taken notice of the ranged fire attack that Natsu had unleashed, they were not present when the ship was destroyed. But the primary reason they were at the port was because they had become suspicious right away after learning from an unidentified source that Bora was the party's host. Lucy said, "Wait, where are we going?" Natsu grinned as he turned to face her. With a beaming smile that revealed his tiny canines, Natsu said, "You wanted to join a guild, right? Why don't you join Fairy Tail?" Lucy's eyes widened, and then a big smile appeared on her face. "Yeah. Where?" Train. Natsu was beginning to exhibit symptoms of motion sickness, indicating that the medication was wearing off, as the three of them rode the train back on Magnolia. She said, "What's wrong, Natsu?" with concern. She couldn't understand why he appeared to be in pain when he hadn't even been hit. Natsu moaned in reply, slowly massaging his stomach. Happy grinned and said, "There's nothing wrong with him, he just has motion sickness. It's a side effect of being a dragon slayer," as he stood beside Natsu. Lucy's eyebrows went up. She had never heard of that magic or term before. "What's a dragon slayer?" she inquired curiously. After glancing at Natsu, Happy turned back to Lucy. "A dragon slayer is what Natsu. He was trained by a dragon, and it's the only magic that can kill a dragon. It's why he was able to eat fire back on the ship against Bora," said Happy. The word, dragon, caused Lucy's eyes to enlarge dramatically. With a hint of surprise in her voice, she exclaimed, "He was raised by a dragon? Wasn't the cat lying? There were no dragons, right?" Happy nodded his head rather than disputing it or claiming he was kidding. He remarked rhetorically, still grinning, "Yup. He was looking for his dad at the town, but he wasn't there." "Well, it makes sense, I guess. How could a dragon be in a town and not be noticed?" The fact that Natsu's father was a dragon should have made Lucy freak out at this point, but she was more shocked that Happy and Natsu even thought that a dragon wouldn't have drawn so much attention from a town. For Cammy's sake, that would draw attention from all over the world. "That's nice, I guess, a sweat drop," wearing Lucy remarked. Happy enthusiastically exclaimed, "I," before jumping onto Natsu's stomach and settling in before he started to snore. The blonde stared at the cat. Like talking being before pulling out a magazine from her bag. She kept it even though it wasn't particularly novel. Although the magazine was only 2 years old, Lucy loved it because it featured her favorite fairy tale articles and images. She was, in a sense, motivated to get stronger. Lucy grinned and looked down at the photo after finding the correct page. A variety of smiles were on the faces of the 7 individuals who stood in front of the guild. Urza was smirking as she stood off to the side, her armor gleaming in the sunlight. But there was something going on to her left that seemed to annoy her. Being the tallest, Laxus was at the back of the group, but he was practically giggling at the 2 people in front of him. The image was a blur of Gray and Natsu's arms as they punched each other. On the other side of the image was Mira. Wearing a white sundress, she was the only one with a bubbly personality and a smile. Finally, while the camera flashed for the photo, Naruto and Kana appeared to be deadpanning at the group despite their smiles. When Lucy first saw the picture, she burst out laughing. On the following page, there was a detailed article about each of Fairy Tail's 7 teenage S-class mages. The king and queens of Fairy Tail were referred to as the most powerful generation and the generation of elites. She read each of the descriptions for a few seconds. The elite generation. The Storm King of Fairy Tail is Naruto. At the age of 13, he became the youngest S-class mage in Fiore's history. He has eliminated numerous dark guilds on his own, significantly lowering the crime rate. He is a very strong mage with a wide range of skills. But it's been almost 2 years since anyone has seen this attractive mage. For a while, he was ranked first among the mage women and girls who wanted to date him. Now, he is in 6th place, but despite his extended absence, he is still a strong candidate for the top spot. Kana. Fairy Tail's Queen of Cards. Proficient with cards magic. Don't be fooled by this brunette mage's adorable appearance. She is more than that. Her strengths are entirely hidden by her appearance. How powerful is she? She is one of the youngest mages to ever reach the rank of S-class mage, having attained it at the age of 16. An interesting thing to note about Kana is that she cannot drink alcohol. Whenever she tries to grab any kind of alcoholic drink, the liquid moves away from her. She believes that Naruto, see the description above, put a seal on her that keeps her from even approaching alcohol. Natsu. The Flame King of Fairy Tail. This exuberant mage never runs out of energy, always running around with a smile on his face. His favorite things include food, training, and fighting, as well as his close friends, which include his team and Fairy Tail itself, his pseudo family. It was rumored that Natsu's inability to walk properly for a while was caused by a particular trick Naruto pulled on him. Nevertheless, there isn't enough data to support this claim. When Natsu was 16, he was promoted. It's interesting to note that, similar to Naruto, he is a contender for the top spot as a mage that women want to date. Gray. Fairy Tail's Frozen King. The ideal representation of cool, collected, and nude, which is undoubtedly advantageous for the women. Ice making is Gray's area of expertise as a mage. He has developed the habit of stripping at random times, including missions, because his early training required him to be immune to cold, even freezing temperatures. Gray's weak rival, Natsu, claims that the Ice Make mage defeated an A-class mage despite stripping during the battle. Mira. Fairy Tail's Demon Queen. Mira was once a very strong mage and is currently the bartender for the most powerful guild in Fury. Before she abruptly stopped going on missions and made the decision to become the guild's barmaid, her strength and power were at incredible levels. Why? No one is willing to divulge the secret behind her behavior, or no one knows. In the distant future, the public will be able to learn the answer to this unsolved mystery. Urza. The Fairy Queen Titania. According to most of the guild, she is the strongest female mage in Fairy Tail. At the age of 15, Urza became the second youngest person in Fury history to earn S rank. Incredibly strong, incredibly attractive, and incredibly rigid. All of the S-class mages on this list said the same word in the final section. Disciplinarian. However, it appears that she has a cute side, so there is still hope for you men out there. She enjoys strawberry cheesecake, which is a secret. Just make sure her cake doesn't get dropped. Laxus. Fairy Tail's Lightning King. On the surface, he appears to be a tall, distant mage who takes pride in his strength. Every Fairy Tail character claims that Laxus respects Naruto and guild arts and respects strength. Having never failed an S-class mission and typically finishing them with surprising ease, he has established a formidable reputation as a powerful mage with lightning abilities. We appreciate everyone who has read this special on the generation of elites in Fairy Tail. And a big thank you to Fairy Tail for letting our business interview and photograph the mages mentioned above. Lucy closed the Sorcerer's magazine with a satisfied sigh and a little laugh, then glanced down at Natsu's sleeping form. The Flame King of Fairy Tail and one of the new generation's elites is Natsu, an S-class mage. The blonde reclined in her chair, suddenly exhausted from the day's activities. Nevertheless, she was thrilled to be able to join the guild of her choice at last. As she peered out the window to her right, she saw the horizon turning a fiery orange as the sun gradually descended, crawling down the mountain's peak until it vanished from view. Before night fell, she was fast asleep. Place. Somewhere in Fury. Come, I want to eat some ramen. A blonde figure was peacefully strolling down a forest path without any real sense of direction. Before he let out a sigh, he appeared to be thinking about food. Man, it's been months since I've had good ramen. The blonde abruptly turned slowly, surveying the entire forest before snapping his lungs out in a yell. His voice reverberated in the forest several times before gradually fading away. Does anyone here have ramen? He exclaimed. Naruto put a palm to his forehead and sighed, roar RRR, in disappointment. I didn't think so. End of chapter. Omake, the training of Natsu. Natsu narrowed his eyes and gazed at Naruto. He yelled at the blonde, you have got to be kidding me. I'm not doing that. Even I'm not that crazy. In front of the Dragon Slayer, Naruto held up a seal and simply stared back carelessly. Naruto replied, it'll help you get stronger, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Natsu abruptly fled after pointing an accusing finger at the blonde sage. I refuse to use a level 17 seal, so you can't force me to wear it. It'll make you stronger. A few meters behind Natsu, a voice called out, come back here. The pink-haired mage turned to see Naruto idly pursuing him while holding the seal tauntingly in the air. Natsu blanched, then turned forward and screamed for his life. No. Natsu. Why are you fleeing? With a false sense of innocence, the blonde inquired. Screw you, please leave me alone. Not wanting to turn around for fear of Naruto catching up with those valuable meters, Natsu screamed back. Here you go. No. Ack.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.